Novel 1. Masato d'Aiglemporto feigns to be dumb, and obtains a gardener's place at a convent of women, who with one accord make haste to lie with him. Fairest ladies, not a few there are both of men and of women, who are so foolish as blindly to believe that, so soon as a young woman has been veiled in white and cowled in black, she ceases to be a woman, and is no more subject to the cravings proper to her sex, than if, in assuming the garb and profession of a nun, she had put on the nature of a stone, and if, perchance, they hear of aught that is counter to this their faith, they are no less vehement in their censure than if some most heinous and unnatural crime had been committed, neither bethinking them of themselves, whom unrestricted liberty avails not to satisfy, nor making due allowance for the prepotent forces of idleness and solitude. And likewise not a few there are that blindly believe that, what with the hoe and the spade and coarse fare and hardship, the carnal propensities are utterly eradicated from the tillers of the soil, and therewith all nimbleness of wit and understanding. But how gross is the error of such as so suppose! I, on whom the Queen has laid her commands, am minded, without deviating from the theme prescribed by her, to make manifest to you by a little story. In this very countryside of ours there was and yet is a convent of women of great repute for sanctity, name it I will not, lest I should in some measure diminish its repute, nuns being at the time of which I speak but 9 in number, including the abbess, and all young women. Their very beautiful garden was in charge of a foolish fellow, who, not being content with his wage, squared accounts with their steward and hied him back to Lamporcio, whence he came. Among others who welcomed him home was a young Tuscan, Masato by name, a stout and hearty fellow, and handsome for a contadino, who asked him where he had been so long. Nuto, as our good friend was called, told him. Masato then asked how he had been employed at the convent, and Nuto answered, I kept their large and beautiful garden in good trim, and, besides, I sometimes went to the wood to fetch the faggots, I drew water, and did some other trifling services, but the ladies gave so little wage that it scarce kept me in shoes. And moreover they are all young, and, I think, they are one and all possessed of the devil, for 'tis impossible to do anything to their mind. Indeed, when I would be at work in the kitchen garden, put this here, would say one, put that here, would say another, and a third would snatch the hoe from my hand, and say, that is not as it should be, and so they would worry me until I would give up working and go out of the garden, so that, what with this thing and that, I was minded to stay there no more, and so I am come hither. The steward asked me before I left to send him anyone whom on my return I might find fit for the work, and I promised, but God bless his loins, I shall be at no pains to find out and send him anyone. As Nuto thus ran on, Masato was seized by such a desire to be with these nuns that he quite pined, as he gathered from what Nuto said that his desire might be gratified. And as that could not be, if he said nothing to Nuto, he remarked, Ah, 'twas well done of thee to come hither. A man to live with women, he might as well live with so many devils. 6 times out of 7 they know not themselves what they want. There the conversation ended, but Masato began to cast about how he should proceed to get permission to live with them. He knew that he was quite competent for the services of which Nuto spoke, and had therefore no fear of failing on that score, but he doubted he should not be received, because he was too young and well favored. So, after much pondering, he fell into the following train of thought. The place is a long way off, and no one there knows me. If I make believe that I am dumb, doubtless I shall be admitted. Whereupon he made his mind up, laid a hatchet across his shoulder, and saying not a word to any of his destination, set forth, intending to present himself at the convent in the character of a destitute man. Arrived there, he had no sooner entered than he chanced to encounter the steward in the courtyard, and making signs to him as dumb folk do, he let him know that of his charity he craved something to eat, and that, if need were, he would split firewood. The steward promptly gave him to eat, and then set before him some logs which Nuto had not been able to split, all which Masato, who was very strong, split in a very short time. The steward, having occasion to go to the wood, took him with him, and there set him at work on the lopping, which done he placed the ass in front of him, and by signs made him understand that he was to take the loppings back to the convent. This he did so well that the steward kept him for some days to do 1 or 2 odd jobs, whereby it so befell that one day the abbess saw him, and asked the steward who he was. "Madam," replied the steward, "'tis a poor deaf-mute that came here a day or 2 ago craving alms, so I have treated him kindly, and have let him make himself useful in many ways. If he knew how to do the work of the kitchen garden, and would stay with us, I doubt not we should be well served, for we have need of him, and he is strong, and would be able for whatever he might turn his hand to, besides which you would have no cause to be apprehensive lest he should be cracking his jokes with your young women." "As I trust in God," said the abbess, "thou sayst sooth. Find out if he can do the garden work, and if he can, do all thou canst to keep him with us. Give him a pair of shoes, an old hood, and speak him well, make much of him, and let him be well fed." All which the steward promised to do. Macedo, meanwhile, was close at hand, making as if he were sweeping the courtyard, and heard all that passed between the abbess and the steward, whereat he gleefully communed with himself on this wise: "Put me once within there, and you will see that I will do the work of the kitchen garden as it never was done before." So the steward set him to work in the kitchen garden, and finding that he knew his business excellently well, made signs to him to know whether he would stay, and he made answer by signs that he was ready to do whatever the steward wished. The steward then signified that he was engaged, told him to take charge of the kitchen garden, and shewed him what he had to do there. Then, having other matters to attend to, he went away, and left him there. Now, as Macedo worked there day by day, the nuns began to tease him, and make him there, but as it commonly happens that folks serve the dumb and used bad language to him, the worst they could think of, supposing that he could not understand them, all which passed scarce heeded by the abbess, who perhaps deemed him as destitute of virility as of speech. Now it so befell that after a hard day's work he was taking a little rest, when 2 young nuns, who were walking in the garden, approached the spot where he lay, and stopped to look at him, while he pretended to be asleep. And so the bolder of the 2 said to the other, "If I thought thou wouldst keep the secret, I would tell thee what I have sometimes meditated, and which thou perhaps mightest also find agreeable." The other replied, "Speak thy mind freely, and be sure that I will never tell a soul." Whereupon the bold one began, "I know not if thou hast ever considered how close we are kept here, and that within these precincts dare never enter any man, unless it be the old steward or this mute. And I have often heard from ladies that have come hither, that all the other sweets that the world has to offer signify not a jot in comparison of the pleasure that a woman has in connection with a man. Whereof I have more than once been minded to make experiment with this mute, no other man being available. Nor, indeed, could one find any man in the whole world so meet, therefore, seeing that he could not blab if he would. Thou seest that he is but a dull lonish lad, whose size has increased out of all proportion to his sense, wherefore I would fain hear what thou hast to say to it." "Alas," said the other, "what is thou sayst? Knowest thou not that we have vowed our virginity to God?" "Oh," rejoined the first, "think but how many vows are made to him all day long, and never one performed, and so for our vow, let him find another or others to perform it." "But," said her companion, "suppose that we conceived, how then?" "Nay but," protested the first, "thou goest about to imagine evil before it befalls thee. Time enough to think of that when it comes to pass. There will be 1,000 ways to prevent its ever being known, so only we do not publish it ourselves." Thus reassured, the other was now the more eager of the 2 to test the quality of the male human animal. "Well then," she said, "how shall we go about it?" And was answered, "Thou seest 'tis past none, I make no doubt, but all the sisters are asleep, except ourselves. Search we through the kitchen garden, to see if there be any there, and if there be none, we have but to take him by the hand and let him hither to the hut where he takes shelter from the rain, and then one shall mount guard while the other has him with her inside. He is such a simpleton that he will do just whatever we bid him." No word of this conversation escaped Macedo, who, being disposed to obey, hoped for nothing so much as that one of them should take him by the hand. They, meanwhile, looked carefully all about them, and satisfied themselves that they were secure from observation. Then she that had broached the subject came close up to Macedo, and shook him, whereupon he started to his feet. So she took him by the hand with a blandishing air, to which he replied with some lounish grins. And then she led him into the hut, where he needed no pressing to do what she desired of him. Which done, she changed places with the other, as loyal comradeship required, and Macedo, still keeping up the pretence of simplicity, did their pleasure. Wherefore before they left, each must needs make another assay of the mood's powers of writing, and afterwards, talking the matter over many times, they agreed that it was in truth not less but even more delightful than they had been given to understand, and so, as they found convenient opportunity, they continued to go and disport themselves with the mute. Now it so chanced that one of their gossips, looking out of the window of her cell, saw what they did, and imparted it to two others. The three held counsel together whether they should not denounce the offenders to the abbess, but soon changed their mind, and came to an understanding with them, whereby they became partners in Macedo. And in course of time by divers chances the remaining 3 nuns also entered the partnership. Last of all the abbess, still witting not of these doings, happened one very hot day, as she walked by herself through the garden, to find Macedo, who now rode so much by night that he could stand very little fatigue by day, stretched at full length asleep under the shade of an almond tree, his person quite exposed in front by reason that the wind had disarranged his clothes, which the lady observing, and knowing that she was alone, fell a prey to the same appetite to which her nuns had yielded. She aroused Macedo, and took him with her to her chamber, where, for some days, though the nuns loudly complained that the gardener no longer came to work in the kitchen garden, she kept him, tasting and retesting the sweetness of that indulgence which she was wont to be the first to censure in others. And when at last she had sent him back from her chamber to his room, she must needs send for him again and again, and made such exorbitant demands upon him, that Macedo, not being able to satisfy so many women, bethought him that his part of mute, should he persist in it, might entail disastrous consequences. So one night, when he was with the abbess, he cut the tongue string, and thus broke silence. "Madam, I have understood that a cock may very well serve 10 hens, but that 10 men are sorely tasked to satisfy a single woman, and here am I expected to serve 9, a burden quite beyond my power to bear. Nay, by what I have already undergone I am now so reduced that my strength is quite spent, wherefore either bid me Godspeed, or find some means to make matters tolerable." Wonderstruck to hear the supposed mute thus speak, the lady exclaimed, "What means this? I took thee to be dumb." "And in sooth, madam, so was I," said Macedo, "not indeed from my birth, but through an illness which took from me the power of speech, which only this very night have I recovered, and so I praise God with all my heart." The lady believed him, and asked him what he meant by saying that he had 9 to serve. Macedo told her how things stood, whereby she perceived that of all her nuns there was not any but was much wiser than she, and lest, if Macedo were sent away, he should give the convent a bad name. She discreetly determined to arrange matters with the nuns in such sort that he might remain there. So, the steward having died within the last few days, she assembled all the nuns, and their and her own past errors being fully avowed, they by common consent, and with Macedo's concurrence, resolved that the neighbors should be given to understand that by their prayers and the merits of their patron saint, Macedo, long mute, had recovered the power of speech, after which they made him steward, and so ordered matters among themselves that he was able to endure the burden of their service. In the course of which, though he procreated not a few little monestas, yet 'twas all managed so discreetly that no breath of scandal stirred, until after the abbess's death, by which time Macedo was advanced in years and minded to return home with the wealth that he had gotten, which he was suffered to do, as soon as he made his desire known. And so Macedo, who had left Lamportio with a hatchet on his shoulder, returned thither in his old age rich and a father, having by the wisdom with which he employed his youth, spared himself the pains and expense of rearing children, endeavoring that such was the measure that Christ meted out to the man that set horns on his cap. Novel 2. A groom lies with the wife of King Egelulf, who learns the fact, keeps his own counsel, finds out the groom and shears him. The shorn shears all his fellows, and so comes safe out of the scrape. Philostratos' story, which the ladies had received now with blushes now with laughter, being ended, the queen bade Pampinea follow suit, which behest Pampinea smilingly obeyed, and thus began. Some there are whose indiscretion is such that they must needs evince that they are fully cognizant of that which it were best they should not know, and entering the covert misdeeds of others, augment beyond measure the disgrace which they would fain diminish. The truth whereof, fair ladies, I mean to shew you in the contrary case, wherein appears the astuteness of one that held, perhaps, an even lower place than would have been Macetas in the esteem of a doughty king. Egelulf, king of the Lombards, who like his predecessors made the city of Pavia and Lombardy the seat of his government, took to wife Theoblind, the widow of Othari, likewise king of the Lombards, a lady very fair, wise and virtuous, but who was unfortunate in her lover. For while the Lombards prospered in peace under the wise and firm rule of King Egelulf, it so befell that one of the queen's grooms, a man born to very low estate, but in native worth far above his mean office, and moreover not a whit less tall and goodly of person than the king, became inordinately enamored of her. And as, for all his base condition, he had sense enough to recognize that his love was in the last degree presumptuous, he disclosed it to none, nay, he did not even venture to tell her the tale by the mute eloquence of his eyes. And albeit he lived without hope that he should ever be able to win her favor, yet he inwardly gloried that he had fixed his affections in so high a place, and being all aflame with passion, he shewed himself zealous beyond any of his comrades to do whatever he felt was likely to please the queen, whereby it came about, that, when the queen had to take horse, she would mount the palfrey that he groomed rather than any other, and when she did so, he deemed himself most highly favored, and never quitted her stirrup, esteeming himself happy if he might but touch her clothes. But as 'tis frequently observed that love waxes as hope wanes, so was it with this poor groom, insomuch that the burden of this great hidden passion, alleviated by no hope, was most grievous to bear, and from time to time, not being able to shake it off, he purposed to die. And meditating on the mode, he was minded that it should be of a kind to make it manifest that he died for the love which he had borne and bore to the queen, and also to afford him an opportunity of trying his fortune whether his desire might in whole or in part be gratified. He had no thought of speaking to the queen, nor yet of declaring his love to her by letter, for he knew that too would be vain either to speak or to write, but he resolved to try to devise some means whereby he might lie with the queen, which end might in no other way be compassed than by contriving to get access to her in her bedroom, which could only be by passing himself off as the king, who, as he knew, did not always lie with her. Wherefore, that he might observe the carriage and dress of the king as he passed to her room, he contrived to conceal himself for several nights in a great hall of the king's palace, which separated the king's room from that of the queen, and on one of these nights he saw the king issue from his room, wrapped in a great mantle, with a lighted torch in one hand and a wand in the other, and cross the hall, and, saying nothing, tap the door of the queen's room with the wand once or twice, whereupon the door was at once opened and the torch taken from his hand. Having observed the king thus go and return, and being bent on doing likewise, he found means to come by a mantle like that which he had seen the king wear, and also a torch and a wand. He then took a warm bath, and having thoroughly cleansed himself, that the smell of the foul straw might not offend the lady, or discover to her the deceit, he in this guise concealed himself as he was wont in the great hall. He waited only until all were asleep, and then, deeming the time come to accomplish his purpose, or by his presumption clear a way to the death which he coveted, he struck a light with the flint and steel which he had brought with him, and having kindled his torch and wrapped himself close in his mantle, he went to the door of the queen's room, and tapped on it twice with his wand. The door was opened by a very drowsy chambermaid, who took the torch and put it out of sight, whereupon without a word he passed within the curtain, laid aside the mantle, and got into the bed where the queen lay asleep. Then, taking her in his arms and straining her to him with ardor, making as if he were moody, because he knew that, when the king was in such a frame, he would never hear aught, in such wise, without word said either on his part or on hers, he had more than once carnal cognizance of the queen. Loath indeed was he to leave her, but, fearing lest by too long tarrying his achieved delight might be converted into woe, he rose, resumed the mantle and the light, and leaving the room without a word, returned with all speed to his bed. He was hardly there when the king got up and entered the queen's room. Worried she wondered not a little, but, reassured by the gladsome greeting which he gave her as he got into bed, she said, "My lord, what a surprise is this tonight! 'Twas but now you left me after an unwonted measure of enjoyment, and do you now return so soon? Consider what you do." From these words the king at once inferred that the queen had been deceived by someone that had counterfeited his person and carriage, but, at the same time, bethinking himself that, as neither the queen nor any other had detected the cheat, 'twas best to leave her in ignorance, he wisely kept silence, which many a fool would not have done, but would have said, "Nay, 'twas not I that was here. Who was it that was here? How came it to pass? Who came hither?" Whereby in the sequel he might have caused the lady needless chagrin, and given her occasion to desire another such experience as she had had, and so have brought disgrace upon himself by uttering that, from which, unuttered, no shame could have resulted. Wherefore, betraying little, either by his mien or by his words, of the disquietude which he felt, the king replied, "Madam, seem I such to you that you cannot suppose that I should have been with you once, and returned to you immediately afterwards?" "Nay, not so, my lord," returned the lady, "but none the less I pray you to look to your health." Then said the king, "And I am minded to take your advice, wherefore, without giving you further trouble, I will leave you." So, angered and incensed beyond measure by the trick which, he saw, had been played upon him, he resumed his mantle and quitted the room with the intention of privily detecting the offender, deeming that he must belong to the palace, and that, whoever he might be, he could not have quitted it. So, taking with him a small lantern which shewed only a glimmer of light, he went into the dormitory which was over the palace stables, and was of great length, insomuch that well nigh all the men servants slept there in divers beds, and arguing that, by whomsoever that of which the queen spoke was done, his heart and pulse could not after such a strain as yet have ceased to throb, he began cautiously with one of the head grooms, and so went from bed to bed, feeling at the heart of each man to see if it was thumping. All were asleep, save only he that had been with the queen, who, seeing the king come, and guessing what he sought to discover, began to be mightily afraid, insomuch that to the agitation which his late exertion had communicated to his heart, terror now added one yet more violent, nor did he doubt that, should the king perceive it, he would kill him. Divers alternatives of action thronged his mind, but at last, observing that the king was unarmed, he resolved to make as if he were asleep, and wait to see what the king would do. So, having tried many and found none that he deemed the culprit, the king came at last to the culprit himself, and marking the thumping of his heart, said to himself, "This is he." But being minded to afford no clue to his ulterior purpose, he did no more than with a pair of scissors which he had brought with him shear away on one side of the man's head a portion of his locks, which, as was then the fashion, he wore very long, that by this token he might recognize him on the morrow, and having so done, he departed and returned to his room. The groom, who was fully sensible of what the king had done, and being a shrewd fellow understood very well to what end he was so marked, got up without a moment's delay, and, having found a pair of scissors for, as it chanced, There were several pairs there belonging to the stables for use in grooming the horse. He went quietly through the dormitory and in like manner sheared the locks of each of the sleepers just above the ear, which done without disturbing any, he went back to bed. On the morrow, as soon as the king was risen, and before the gates of the palace were opened, he summoned all his men-servants to his presence, and, as they stood bareheaded before him, scanned them closely to see whether the one whom he had sheared was there, and observing with surprise that the more part of them were all sheared in the same manner, said to himself, "Of a surety this fellow, whom I go about to detect, evinces, for all his base condition, a high degree of sense." Then, recognizing that he could not compass his end without causing a bruit, and not being minded to brave so great a dishonor in order to be avenged upon so petty an offender, he was content by a single word of admonition to shew him that his offense had not escaped notice. Wherefore, turning to them all, he said, "He that did it, let him do it no more, and get you hence in God's peace." Another would have put them to the strappado, the question, the torture, and thereby have brought to light that which one should rather be sedulous to cloak, and having so brought it to light, would, however complete the retribution which he exacted, have not lessened but vastly augmented his disgrace, and sullied the fair fame of his lady. Those who heard the king's parting admonition wondered, and made much question with one another, what the king might have meant to convey by it, but 'twas understood by none but him to whom it referred, who was discreet enough never to reveal the secret as long as the king lived, or again to stake his life on such a venture. Novel 3. Under cloak of confession and a most spotless conscience, a lady, enamored of a young man, induces a booby friar unwittingly to provide a means to the entire gratification of her passion. When Pampigny had done, and several of the company had commended the hardihood and wariness of the groom, as also the wisdom of the king, the queen, turning to Philomena, bade her follow suit. Wherefore with manner debonair Philomena thus began, "The story which I shall tell you is of a trick which was actually played by a fair lady upon a booby religious, and which every layman should find the more diverting that these religious, being, for the most part, great blockheads and men of odd manners and habits, do nevertheless credit themselves with more ability and knowledge in all kinds than fall to the lot of the rest of the world, whereas, in truth, they are far inferior, and so, not being able, like others, to provide their own sustenance, or prompted by sheer baseness to fly thither for refuge where they may find provender, like pigs. Which story, sweet my ladies, I shall tell you, not merely that thereby I may continue the sequence in obedience to the Queen's behest, but also to the end that I may let you see that even the religious, in whom we in our boundless credulity repose exorbitant faith, may be, and sometimes are, made not to say by men even by some of us women the sport of their sly wit. In our city, where wiles do more abound than either love or faith, there dwelt, not many years ago, a gentlewoman richly endowed, none more so by nature with physical charms, as also with gracious manners, high spirit and fine discernment. Her name I know, but will not disclose it, nor yet that of any other who figures in this story, because there yet live those who might take offense thereat, though after all it might well be passed off with a laugh. High-born and married to an artificer of woolen fabrics, she could not rid her mind of the disdain with which, by reason of his occupation, she regarded her husband, for no man, however wealthy, so he were of low condition, seemed to her worthy to have a gentlewoman to wife, and seeing that for all his wealth he was fit for nothing better than to devise a blend, set up a warp, or tackle about yarn with a spinster, she determined to dispense with his embraces, save so far as she might find it impossible to refuse them, and to find her satisfaction elsewhere with one that seemed to her more meet to afford it than her artificer of woolens. In this frame of mind she became enamored of a man well worthy of her love and not yet past middle age, insomuch that, if she saw him not in the day, she must needs pass an unquiet night. The gallant, meanwhile, remained fancy-free, for he knew not of the lady's case, and she, being apprehensive of possible perils to ensue, was far too circumspect to make it known to him either by writing or by word of mouth of any of her female friends. Then she learned that he had much to do with a simple, lonish fellow, but nevertheless, as being a man of most holy life, reputed by almost everybody a most worthy friar, and decided that she could not find a better intermediary between herself and her lover than this same friar. So, having matured her plan, she hied her at a convenient time to the convent where the friar abode and sent for him, saying, that, if he so pleased, she would be confessed by him. The friar, who saw at a glance that she was a gentlewoman, gladly heard her confession, which done, she said, My father, I have yet a matter to confide to you, in which I must crave your aid and counsel. Who my kinsfolk and husband are, I wot you know, for I have myself told you. My husband loves me more dearly than his life, and being very wealthy, he can well and does forthwith afford me whatever I desire. Wherefore, as he loves me, even so I love him more dearly than myself, nor was there ever yet wicked woman that deserved the fire so richly as should I. Were I guilty, I speak not of acts, but of so much as a single thought of crossing his will or tarnishing his honor. Now Mandaricious name, indeed, I know not, but he seems to me to be a gentleman, and, if I mistake not, he is much with you a fine man and tall, his garb done and very decent, who, the bent of my mind being, belike, quite unknown to him, would seem to have laid siege to me, insomuch that I cannot shew myself at door or casement, or quit the house, but forthwith he presents himself before me. Indeed I find it passing strange that he is not here now. Worried I am sorely troubled, because, when men so act, unmerited reproach will often thereby be cast upon honest women. At times I have been minded to inform my brothers of the matter, but then I have bethought me that men sometimes frame messages in such a way as to evoke untoward answers, whence follow high words, and so they proceed to rash acts. Wherefore, to obviate trouble and scandal, I have kept silence, and by preference have made you my confidant, both because you are the gentleman's friend, and because it befits your office to censure such behavior not only in friends but in strangers. And so I beseech you for the love of our only Lord God to make him sensible of his fault, and pray him to offend no more in such sort. Other ladies there are in plenty, who may, perchance, be disposed to welcome such advances, and be flattered to attract his fond and assiduous regard, which to me, who am in no wise inclined to encourage it, is but a most grievous molestation. Having thus spoken, the lady bowed her head as if she were ready to weep. The holy friar was at no loss to apprehend who it was of whom she spoke. He commended her virtuous frame, firmly believing that what she said was true, and promised to take such action that she should not again suffer the like annoyance, nor, knowing that she was very wealthy, did he omit to extol works of charity and almsgiving, at the same time opening to her his own needs. I make my suit to you, said she, for the love of God, and if your friend should deny what I have told you, tell him roundly that 'twas from me you had it, and that I made complaint to you thereof. So, her confession ended and penance imposed, bethinking her of the hints which the friar had dropped touching almsgiving. She slipped into his hand as many coins as it would hold, praying him to say masses for the souls of her dead. She then rose and went home. Not long afterwards the gallant paid one of his wonted visits to the holy friar. They conversed for a while of divers topics, and then the friar took him aside, and very courteously reproved him for so haunting and pursuing the lady with his gaze, as from what she had given him to understand, he supposed was his wont. The gallant, who had never regarded her with any attention, and very rarely passed her house, was amazed, and was about to clear himself, when the friar closed his mouth, saying, Now away with this pretence of amazement, and waste not words in denial, for 'twill not avail thee. I have it not from the neighbors. She herself, bitterly complaining of thy conduct, told it me. I say not how ill this levity beseems thee, but of her I tell thee so much as this, that, if I ever knew woman averse to such idle philandering, she is so, and therefore for thy honour's sake, and that she be no more vexed, I pray thee refrain therefrom, and let her be in peace. The gallant, having rather more insight than the holy friar, was not slow to penetrate the lady's finesse. He therefore made as if he were rather shame-stricken, promised to go no further with the matter, and hied him straight from the friar to the lady's house, where she was always posted at a little casement to see if he were passing by. As she saw him come, she shewed him so gay and gracious a mien that he could no longer harbor any doubt that he had put the true construction upon what he had heard from the friar, and thenceforth, to his own satisfaction and the immense delight and solace of the lady, he omitted not daily to pass that way, being careful to make it appear as if he came upon other business. 'Twas thus not long before the lady understood that she met with no less favor in his eyes than he in hers, and being desirous to add fuel to his flame, and to assure him of the love she bore him, as soon as time and occasion served, she returned to the holy friar, and having sat herself down at his feet in the church, fell weeping. The friar asked her in a soothing tone what her new trouble might be, whereto the lady answered, "My father, 'tis still that accursed friend of thine, of whom I made complaint to you some days ago, and who would now seem to have been born for my most grievous torment, and to cause me to do that by reason whereof I shall never be glad again, nor venture to place myself at your feet." "How," said the friar, "has he not forborne to annoy thee?" "Not he, indeed," said the lady. "On the contrary, 'tis my belief that, since I complained to you of him, he has, as if in despite, being offended, belike, that I did so, passed my house 7 times for once that he did so before. Nay, would to God he were content to pass and fix me with his eyes, but he is waxed so bold and unabashed that only yesterday he sent a woman to me at home with his compliments and adularies, and, as if I had not purses and girdles enough, he sent me a purse and a girdle whereat I was, as I still am, so wroth, that, had not conscience first, and then regard for you, weighed with me, I had flown into a frenzy of rage. However, I restrained myself, and resolved neither to do nor to say aught without first letting you know it. Nor only so, but, lest the woman who brought the purse and girdle, and to whom I at first returned them, shortly bidding her begone and take them back to the sender, should keep them and tell him that I had accepted them, as I believe they sometimes do, I recalled her and had them back, albeit 'twas in no friendly spirit that I received them from her hand, and I have brought them to you, that you may return them to him and tell him that I stand in no need of such gifts from him, because, thanks be to God and my husband, I have purses and girdles enough to smother him in. And if after this he leave me not alone, I pray you as my father to hold me excused if, come what may, I tell it to my husband and brothers, for much liefer had I that he suffer indignity, if so it must be, than that my fair fame should be sullied on his account." "That holds good, friar." Weeping bitterly as she thus ended, she drew from under her robe a purse of very fine and ornate workmanship and a dainty and costly little girdle, and threw them into the lap of the friar, who, fully believing what she said, manifested the utmost indignation as he took them, and said, "Daughter, that by these advances thou shouldst be moved to anger, I deem neither strange nor henchable, but I am instant with thee to follow my advice in the matter. I hid him some days ago, and ill has he kept the promise that he made me, for which cause, and this last feat of his I will surely make his ears so tingle that he will give thee no more trouble. Wherefore, for God's sake, let not thyself be so overcome by wrath as to tell it to any of thy kinsfolk, which might bring upon him a retribution greater than he deserves. Nor fear lest thereby thy fair fame should suffer, for I shall ever be thy most sure witness before God and man that thou art innocent." The lady made a shew of being somewhat comforted. Then, after a pause, for well she knew the greed of him and his likish, said, "Of late, sir, by night, the spirits of divers of my kinsfolk have appeared to me in my sleep, and methinks they are in most grievous torment. Alms they crave, naught else, especially my mother, who seems to be in so woeful and abject a plight that 'tis pitiful to see. Methinks 'tis a most grievous torment to her to see the tribulation which this enemy of God has brought upon me. I would therefore have you say for their souls the 40 masses of Saint Gregory and some of your prayers, that God may deliver them from this purging fire." So saying, she slipped a florin into the hand of the holy friar, who took it gleefully, and having with edifying words and many examples fortified her in her devotion, gave her his benediction, and suffered her to depart. The lady gone, the friar, who had still no idea of the trick that had been played upon him, sent for his friend, who was no sooner come than he gathered from the friar's troubled air that he had news of the lady, and waited to hear what he would say. The friar repeated what he had said before, and then broke out into violent and heated objurgation on the score of the lady's latest imputation. The gallant, who did not as yet apprehend the friar's drift, gave but a very faint denial to the charge of sending the purse and girdle, in order that he might not discredit the lady with the friar, if, perchance, she had given him the purse and girdle. Whereupon the friar exclaimed with great heat, "How canst thou deny it, thou wicked man? Why, here they are, she brought them to me in tears with her own hand. Look at them, and say if thou knowest them not." The gallant now feigned to be much ashamed, and said, "Why, yes, indeed, I do know them. I confess that I did wrong, and I swear to you that, now I know her character, you shall never hear word more of this matter." Many words followed, and then the blockheadly friar gave the purse and girdle to his friend, after which he read him a long lecture, besought him to meddle no more with such matters, and on his promising obedience dismissed him. Elated beyond measure by the assurance which he now had of the lady's love, and the beautiful present, the gallant, on leaving the friar, hied him straight to a spot whence he stealthily gave the lady to see that he had both her gifts, whereat the lady was well content, the more so as her intrigues seemed ever to prosper more and more. She waited now only for her husband's departure from home to crown her enterprise with success. Nor was it long before occasion required that her husband should go to Genoa. The very morning that he took horse and rode away, she hied her to the holy friar, and after many a lamentation she said to him betwixt her sobs, "My father, now at last I tell you out and out that I can bear my suffering no longer. I promised you some days ago to do naught in this matter without first letting you know it. I am now come to crave release from that promise, and that you may believe that my lamentations and complaints are not groundless, I will tell you how this friend of yours, who should rather be called a devil let loose from hell, treated me only this very morning, a little before matins. As ill luck would have it, he learned, I know not how, that yesterday morning my husband went to Genoa, and so this morning at the said hour he came into my garden, and got up by a tree to the window of my bedroom, which looks out over the garden, and had already opened the casement, and was about to enter the room, when I suddenly awoke, and got up and uttered a cry, and should have continued to cry out, had not he, who was still outside, implored my mercy for God's sake and yours, telling me who he was. So, for love of you I was silent, and naked as I was born, ran and shut the window in his face, and Hebud locked to him made off, I suppose, for I saw him no more. Consider now if such behavior be seemly and tolerable. I for my part am minded to put up with no more of it. Indeed I have endured too much already for love of you. Wroth beyond measure was the friar, as he heard her thus speak, nor knew he what to say, except that he several times asked her if she were quite certain that it was no other than he. Holy name of God, replied the lady, as if I did not yet know him from another. He it was, I tell you, and do you give no credence to his denial? Daughter, said then the friar, there is here naught else to say but that this is a monstrous presumption and a most heinous offense, and thou didst well to send him away as thou didst. But seeing that God has preserved thee from shame, I would implore thee that as thou hast twice followed my advice, thou do so likewise on this occasion, and making no complaint to any of thy kinsfolk, leave it to me to try if I can control this devil that has slipped his chain, whom I suppose to be a saint, and if I succeed in weaning him from this insensate folly, well and good, and if I fail, thenceforth I give thee leave, with my blessing, to do whatsoever may commend itself to thy own judgment. Lo now, answered the lady, once again I will not vex or disobey you, but be sure that you so order matters that he refrain from further annoyance, as I give you my word that never will I have recourse to you again touching this matter. Then, without another word, and with a troubled air, she took leave of him. Scarcely was she out of the church when the gallant came up. The friar called him, took him aside, and gave him the affront in such sort as 'twas never before given to any man, reviling him as a disloyal and perjured traitor. The gallant, who by his 2 previous lessons had been taught how to value the friar's censures, listened attentively, and sought to draw him out by ambiguous answers. "Wherefore this wrath, sir?" he began. "Have I crucified Christ?" "Mark the fellow's effrontery," retorted the friar. "List to what he says. He talks, forsooth, as if 'twere a year or so since, and his violencies and clewdnesses were clean gone from his memory for lapse of time. Between matins and now hast thou forgotten this morning's outrage? Where wast thou this morning shortly before daybreak?" "Where was I?" rejoined the gallant. "That know not I. 'Tis indeed betimes that the news has reached you." "True indeed it is," said the friar, "that the news has reached me. I suppose that, because the husband was not there, thou never doubtedst that thou wouldst forthwith be received by the lady with open arms." "Ah, the gay gallant, the honorable gentleman! He is now turned prowler by night, and breaks into gardens, and climbs trees. Dost thou think by sheer importunity to vanquish the virtue of this lady, that thou assailest her windows at night by the trees? She dislikes thee of all things in the world, and yet thou must still persist. Well indeed hast thou laid my admonitions to heart, to say nothing of the many proofs which she has given thee of her disdain. But I have yet a word for thee. Hitherto, not that she bears thee any love, but that she has yielded to my urgent prayers. She has kept silence as to thy misdeeds. She will do so no more. I have given her leave to act as she may think fit, if thou givest her any further annoyance. And what wilt thou do if she informs her brothers?" The gallant, now fully apprised of what it imported him to know, was profuse in promises, whereby as best he might he reassured the friar, and so left him. The very next night, as soon as the maiden hour was come, he entered the garden, climbed up the tree, found the window open, entered the chamber, and in a trice was in the embrace of his fair lady. Anxiously had she expected him, and blithely did she now greet him, saying, "All thanks to Master Friar that he so well taught thee the way hither." Then, with many a jest and laugh at the simplicity of the asinine friar, and many a flout at distaffles and combs and cards, they solaced themselves with one another to their no small delight. Nor did they omit so to arrange matters that they were well able to dispense with Master Friar, and yet pass many another night together with no less satisfaction, to which goal I pray that I, and all other Christian souls that are so minded, may be speedily guided of God in His holy mercy. Novel 4. Don Felice instructs Fra Puccio how to attain blessedness by doing a penance. Fra Puccio does the penance, and meanwhile Don Felice has a good time with Fra Puccio's wife. When Filomena, having concluded her story, was silent, and Daniel had added a few honeyed phrases in praise of the lady's wit and Filomena's closing prayer, the queen glanced with a smile to Pamphilo, and said, "Now, Pamphilo, give us some pleasant trifle to speed our delight." "That gladly will I," returned forthwith Pamphilo. "And then, madam," he began, "not a few there are that, while they use their best endeavors to get themselves places in paradise, do, by inadvertence, send others thither, as did, not long ago, betide a fair neighbor of ours, as you shall hear. Hard by San Parisio there used to live, as I have heard tell, a worthy man and wealthy, Puccio di Ranieri by name, who in later life, under an overpowering sense of religion, became a tertiary of the order of Saint Francis, and was thus known as Fra Puccio. In which spiritual life he was the better able to persevere that his household consisted but of a wife and a maid, and having no need to occupy himself with any craft, he spent no small part of his time at church where, being a simple soul and slow of wit, he said his paternosters, heard sermons, assisted at the Mass, never missed Laud's eye. When chanted by the seculars, fasted and mortified his flesh, nay so 'twas whisperive was of the flagellants. His wife, Moneth Isabetta by name, a woman of from 28 to 30 summers, still young for her age, lusty, comely and plump as a Castlean apple, had not unfrequently, by reason of her husband's devoutness, if not also of his age, more than she cared for, of abstinence, and when she was sleepy, or, maybe, ragish, he would repeat to her the life of Christ, and the sermons of Fra Anastacio, or the lament of the Magdalene, or the like. Now, while such was the tenor of her life, there returned from Paris a young monk, by name Don Felice, of the convent of San Parisio, a well-favored man and keen-witted, and profoundly learned, with whom Fra Puccio became very intimate, and as there was no question which he could put to him but Don Felice could answer it, and moreover he made great shew of holiness, for well he knew Fra Puccio's bent, Fra Puccio took to bringing him home and entertaining him at breakfast and supper, as occasion served, and for love of her husband the lady also grew familiar with Don Felice, and was zealous to do him honor. So the monk, being a constant visitor at Fra Puccio's house, and seeing the lady so lusty and plump, surmised that of which she must have most lack, and made up his mind to afford, if he could, at once relief to Fra Puccio and contentment to the lady. So cautiously, now and again, he cast an admiring glance in her direction with such effect that he kindled in her the same desire with which he burned, and marking his success, took the first opportunity to declare his passion to her. He found her fully disposed to gratify it, but how this might be, he was at a loss to discover, for she would not trust herself with him in any place whatever except her own house, and there it could not be, because Fra Puccio never travelled, whereby the monk was greatly dejected. Long he pondered the matter, and at length thought of an expedient, whereby he might be with the lady in her own house without incurring suspicion, notwithstanding that Fra Puccio was there. So being with Fra Puccio one day, he said to him, "Reasons many have I to know, Fra Puccio, that all thy desire is to become a saint, but it seems to me that thou furest by a circuitous route, whereas there is one very direct, which the Pope and the greater prelates that are about him know and use, but will have it remain a secret, because otherwise the clergy, who for the most part live by alms, and could not then expect alms or aught else from the laity, would be speedily ruined. However, as thou art my friend, and hast shewn me much honor, I would teach thee that way, if I were assured that thou wouldst follow it without letting another soul in the world hear of it." Fra Puccio was now all agog to hear more of the matter, and began most earnestly entreating Don Felice to teach him the way, swearing that without Don Felice's leave none should ever hear of it from him, and averring that, if he found it practicable, he would certainly follow it. "I am satisfied with thy promises," said the monk, "and I will shew thee the way. Know then that the holy doctors hold that whoso would achieve blessedness must do the penance of which I shall tell thee, but see thou take me judiciously. I do not say that after the penance thou wilt not be a sinner, as thou art, but the effect will be that the sins which thou hast committed up to the very hour of the penance will all be purged away and thereby remitted to thee, and the sins which thou shalt commit thereafter will not be written against thee to thy damnation, but will be quit by holy water, like venial sins. First of all then the penitent must with great exactitude confess his sins when he comes to begin the penance. Then follows a period of fasting and very strict abstinence, which must last for 40 days, during which time he is to touch no woman whomsoever, not even his wife. Moreover, thou must have in thy house some place whence thou mayst see the sky by night, whither thou must resort at Compline, and there thou must have a beam, very broad, and placed in such a way, that, standing, thou canst rest thy nether part upon it, and so, not raising thy feet from the ground, thou must extend thy arms, so as to make a sort of crucifix, and if thou wouldst have pegs to rest them on thou mayst, and on this manner, thy gaze fixed on the sky, and never moving a jot, thou must stand until matins. And wert thou lettered, it were proper for thee to say meanwhile certain prayers that I would give thee, but as thou art not so, thou must say 300 paternosters, and as many of Marias in honor of the Trinity, and thus contemplating the sky, be ever mindful that God was the creator of the heaven and the earth, and being set even as Christ was upon the cross, meditate on his passion. Then, when the maiden bell sounds, thou mayst, if thou please, go to bed, but see that thou undress not and sleep, but in the morning thou must go to church, and hear at least 3 masses, and say 50 paternosters and as many of Mary's, after which thou mayst with a pure heart do aught that thou hast to do, and breakfast, but at vespers thou must be again at church, and say there certain prayers, which I shall give thee in writing and which are indispensable, and after compline thou must repeat thy former exercise. Do this, and I, who have done it before thee, have good hope that even before thou shalt have reached the end of the penance, thou wilt, if thou shalt do it in a devout spirit, have already a marvelous foretaste of the eternal blessedness. This, said Fra Puccio, is neither a very severe nor a very long penance, and can be very easily managed, wherefore in God's name I will begin on Sunday. And so he took his leave of Dom Felice, and went home, and, by Dom Felice's permission, informed his wife of every particular of his intended penance. The lady understood very well what the monk meant by enjoining him not to stir from his post until matins, and deeming it an excellent device, she said that she was well content that he should do this or aught else that he thought good for his soul, and to the end that his penance might be blessed of, she would herself fast with him, though she would go no further. So they did as they had agreed. When Sunday came, Fra Puccio began his penance, and Master Monk, by understanding with the lady, came most evenings, at the hour when he was secure from discovery, to sup with her, always bringing with him abundance both of meat and of drink, and after slept with her till the maiden hour, when he got up and left her, and Fra Puccio went to bed. The place which Fra Puccio had chosen for his penance was close to the room in which the lady slept, and only separated from it by the thinnest of partitions, so that, the monk and the lady disporting themselves with one another without stint or restraint, Fra Puccio thought he felt the floor of the house shake a little, and pausing at his 100th paternoster, but without leaving his post, called out to the lady to know what she was about. The lady, who dearly loved a jest, and was just then riding the horse of Saint Benedict or Saint John Gualbert, answered, "I fetch, husband, I am as restless as may be." "Restless," said Fra Puccio, "how so? What means this restlessness?" Whereto with a hearty laugh, for which she doubtless had good occasion, the bonny lady replied, "What means it? How should you ask such a question? Why, I have heard you say 1,000 times, who fasting goes to bed uneasy lies his head." Fra Puccio, supposing that her wakefulness and restlessness abed was due to want of food, said in good faith, "Wife, I told thee I would have thee not fast, but as thou hast chosen to fast, think not of it, but think how thou mayst compose thyself to sleep. Thou tossest about the bed in such sort that the shaking is felt here." "That need cause thee no alarm," rejoined the lady. "I know what I am about. I will manage as well as I can, and do thou likewise." So Fra Puccio said no more to her, but resumed his paternosters, and thenceforth every night, while Fra Puccio's penance lasted, the lady and Master Monk, having had a bed made up for them in another part of the house, did their wont in it most gamesomely, the monk departing and the lady going back to her bed at one and the same time, being shortly before Fra Puccio's return from his nightly vigil. The friar thus persisting in his penance, while the lady took her fill of pleasure with the monk, she would from time to time say jestingly to him, "Thou layest a penance upon Fra Puccio whereby we are rewarded with paradise." So well indeed did she relish the dainties with which the monk regaled her, the more so by contrast with the abstemious life to which her husband had long accustomed her, that, when Fra Puccio's penance was done, she found means to enjoy them elsewhere, and ordered her indulgence with such discretion as to ensure its long continuance. Whereby that my story may end as it began. It came to pass that Fra Puccio, hoping by his penance to win a place for himself in paradise, did in fact translate thither the monk who had shewn him the way, and the wife who lived with him in great dearth of that of which the monk in his charity gave her superabundant largesse. Novel 5. Zima gives a palfrey to Messer Francesco Virgilisi, who in return suffers him to speak with his wife. She keeping silence, he answers in her stead, and the sequel is in accordance with his answer. When Pamphilo had brought the story of Fra Puccio to a close amid the laughter of the ladies, the Queen debonairly bade Elisa follow suit, and she, whose manner had in it a slight touch of severity, which betokened not despite, but was habitual to her. Thus began, many there are that, being very knowing, think that others are quite the reverse, and so, many a time, thinking to beguile others, or themselves beguiled. Wherefore I deem it the height of folly for any one wantonly to challenge another to a contest of wit. But, as, perchance, all may not be of the same opinion, I am minded, without deviating from the prescribed order, to acquaint you with that which thereby befell a certain knight of Pistoia. Know then that at Pistoia there lived a knight, Messer Francesco, by name, of the Virgilisic family, a man of much wealth and good parts, being both wise and clever, but withal niggardly beyond measure. Which Messer Francesco, having to go to Milan in the capacity of podesta, had provided himself with all that was meet for the honorable support of such a dignity, save only a palfrey handsome enough for him, and not being able to come by any such, he felt himself at a loss. Now there was then in Pistoia a young man, Ricciardo by name, of low origin but great wealth, who went always so trim and fine and foppish of person, that folk had bestowed upon him the name of Zima, by which he was generally known. Zima had long and to no purpose burned and yearned for love of Messer Francesco's very fair and no less virtuous wife. His passion was matter of common notoriety, and so it befell that someone told Messer Francesco that he had but to ask Zima, who was the possessor of one of the handsomest palfreys in Tuscany, which on that account he greatly prized, and he would not hesitate to give him the horse for the love which he bore his wife. So our niggardly knight sent for Zima, and offered to buy the horse of him, hoping thereby to get him from Zima as a gift. Zima heard the knight gladly, and thus made answer, "Sell you my horse, sir, I would not, though you gave me all that you have in the world, but I shall be happy to give him to you, when you will, on this condition, that, before he pass into your hands, I may by your leave and in your presence say a few words to your wife so privately that I may be heard by her alone." Thinking at once to gratify his cupidity, and to outwit Zima, the knight answered that he was content that it should be even as Zima wished. Then, leaving him in the hall of the palace, he went to his lady's chamber, and told her the easy terms on which he might acquire the palfrey, bidding her give Zima his audience, but on no account to vouchsafe him a word of reply. This the lady found by no means to her mind, but, as she must needs obey her husband's commands, she promised compliance, and followed him into the hall to hear what Zima might have to say. Zima then renewed his contract with the knight in due form, whereupon, the lady being seated in a part of the hall where she was quite by herself, he sate down by her side, and thus began, "Noble lady, I have too much respect for your understanding to doubt that you have long been well aware of the extremity of passion whereto I have been brought by your beauty, which certainly exceeds that of any other lady that I have ever seen, to say nothing of your exquisite manners and incomparable virtues, which might well serve to captivate every soaring spirit that is in the world. Wherefore there need no words of mine to assure you that I love you with a love greater and more ardent than any that man yet bore to woman, and so without doubt I shall do, as long as my woeful life shall hold this frame together, nay, longer yet, for, if love there be in the next world as in this, I shall love you evermore. And so you may make your mind secure that there is nothing that is yours, be it precious or be it common, which you may count as in such and so sure a sort your own as me, for all that I am and have, and that thereof you may not lack evidence of infallible cogency. I tell you, that I should deem myself more highly favored, if I might at your command do somewhat to pleasure you, than if at my command the whole world were forthwith to yield me obedience. And as 'tis even in such sort that I am yours, 'tis not unworthily that I make bold to offer my petitions to your highness, as being to me the sole, exclusive source of all peace, of all bliss, of all health. Wherefore, as your most lowly vassal, I pray you, dear my bliss, my soul's one hope, wherein she nourishes herself in love's devouring flame, that in your great benignity you deign so far to mitigate the harshness which in the past you have shewn towards me, yours though I am, that, consoled by your compassion, I may say, that, as 'twas by your beauty that I was smitten with love, so 'tis to your pity that I owe my life, which, if in your haughtiness you lend not ear unto my prayers, will assuredly fail, so that I shall die, and, it may be, 'twill be said that you slew me. 'Twould not redound to your honor that I died for love of you, but let that pass. I cannot but think, however, that you would sometimes feel a touch of remorse, and would grieve that 'twas your doing, and that now and again, relenting, you would say to yourself, ah, how wrong it was of me that I had not pity on my Zima, by which too late repentance you would but enhance your grief. Wherefore, that this come not to pass, repent you while it is in your power to give me ease, and shew pity on me before I die, seeing that with you it rests to make me either the gladdest or the saddest man that lives. My trust is in your generosity, that 'twill not brook that a love so great and of such a sort as mine should receive death for guerdon, and that by a gladsome and gracious answer you will repair my shattered spirits, which are all I tremble in your presence for very fear. When he had done, he heaved several very deep sighs, and a few tears started from his eyes, while he awaited the lady's answer. Long time he had wooed her with his eyes, had tilted in her honor, had greeted her rising with music, and against these and all like modes of attack she had been proof, but the heartfelt words of her most ardent lover were not without their effect, and she now began to understand what she had never till then understood, to wit, what love really means. So, albeit she obeyed her lord's behest, and kept silence, yet she could not but betray by a slight sigh that which, if she might have given Zima his answer, she would readily have avowed. After waiting a while, Zima found it strange that no answer was forthcoming, and he then began to perceive the trick which the knight had played him. However, he kept his eyes fixed on the lady, and observing that her eyes glowed now and again, as they met his, and noting the partially suppressed sighs which escaped her, he gathered a little hope, which gave him courage to try a novel plan of attack. So, while the lady listened, he began to make answer for her to himself on this wise: Zima mine, true indeed it is that long since I discerned that thou didst love me with a love exceeding great and whole-hearted, whereof I have now yet ampler assurance by thine own words, and well content I am therewith, as indeed I ought to be. And however harsh and cruel I may have seemed to thee, I would by no means have thee believe that I have been such at heart as I have seemed in aspect. Rather, be assured that I have ever loved thee and held thee dear above all other men. The mean which I have worn was but prescribed by fear of another and solicitude for my fair fame. But a time will soon come when I shall be able to give thee plain proof of my love, and to accord the love which thou hast borne and dost bear me its due guerdon. Wherefore be comforted and of good hope, for Messer Francesco is to go in a few days' time to Milan as Podesta, as thou well knowest, seeing that for love of me thou hast given him thy fine palfrey, and I vow to thee upon my faith, upon the true love which I bear thee, that without fail, within a few days thereafter thou shalt be with me, and we will give our love complete and gladsome consummation. And that I may have no more occasion to speak to thee of this matter, be it understood between us that henceforth when thou shalt observe 2 towels disposed at the window of my room which overlooks the garden, thou shalt come to me after nightfall of that same day by the garden door, and look well to it that thou be not seen, and thou shalt find me waiting for thee, and we will have our fill of mutual cheer and solace all night long. Having thus answered for the lady, Zima resumed his own person, and thus replied to the lady: Dearest madam, your boon response so overpowers my every faculty that scarce can I frame words to render you due thanks, and, were I able to utter all I feel, time, however long, would fail me fully to thank you as I would fain and as I ought. Wherefore I must even leave it to your sage judgment to divine that which I yearn in vain to put in words. Let this one word suffice, that as you bid me, so I shall not fail to do, and then, having, perchance, firmer assurance of the great boon which you have granted me, I will do my best endeavor to thank you in terms the amplest that I may command. For the present there is no more to say, and so, dearest my lady, I commend you to God, and may He grant you your heart's content of joy and bliss. To all which the lady returned never a word. Wherefore Zima rose and turned to rejoin the knight, who, seeing him on his feet, came towards him, and said with a laugh, How sayst thou? Have I faithfully kept my promise to thee? Not so, sir, replied Zima, for by thy word I was to have spoken with thy wife, and by thy deed I have spoken to a statue of marble. Which remark was much relished by the knight, who, well as he had thought of his wife, thought now even better of her, and said, So thy palfrey that was is now mine out and out. 'Tis even so, sir, replied Zima, but had I thought to have gotten such fruit as I have from this favor of yours, I would not have craved it, but would have let you have the palfrey as a free gift, and would to God I had done so, for, as it is, you have bought the palfrey and I have not sold him. This drew a laugh from the knight, who within a few days thereafter mounted the palfrey which he had gotten, and took the road for Milan, there to enter on his podestate. The lady, now mistress of herself, bethought her of Zima's words, and the love which he bore her, and for which he had parted with his palfrey, and observing that he frequently passed her house, said to herself, What am I about? Why throw I my youth away? My husband is gone to Milan, and will not return for 6 months, and when can he ever restore them to me? When I am old. And besides, shall I ever find another such lover as Zima? I am quite by myself. There is none to fear. I know not why I take not my good time while I may. I shall not always have the like opportunity as at present. No one will ever know, and if it should get known, 'tis better to do and repent than to forbear and repent. Of which meditations the issue was that one day she set 2 towels in the window overlooking the garden, according to Zima's word, and Zima, having marked them with much exultation, stole at nightfall alone to the door of the lady's garden, and finding it open, crossed to another door that led into the house, where he found the lady awaiting him. On sight of him she rose to meet him, and gave him the heartiest of welcomes. 100,000 times he embraced and kissed her, as he followed her upstairs. Then without delay they hied them to bed, and new love's furthest born. And so far was the first time from being in this case the last, that, while the knight was at Milan, and indeed after his return, there were seasons not a few at which Zima resorted thither to the immense delight of both parties. Novel 6. Ricciardo Minutolo loves the wife of Filippo Fiancolfic, and knowing her to be jealous, makes her believe that his own wife is to meet Filippo at a bagnio on the ensuing day, whereby she is induced to go thither, where, thinking to have been with her husband, she discovers that she is tarried with Ricciardo. When Elisa had quite done, the queen, after some commendation of Zima's sagacity, bade Ficametta follow with a story. Whereto Ficametta, all smiles, responded, Madam, with all my heart, and thus began, Richly though our city abounds, as in all things else, so also in instances to suit every topic, yet I am minded to journey some distance thence, and, like Elisa, to tell you something of what goes on in other parts of the world. Wherefore pass we to Naples, where you shall hear how one of these sanctified that shew themselves so shy of love, was by the subtlety of her lover brought to taste of the fruit before she had known the flowers of love, whereby at one and the same time you may derive from the past counsel of prudence for the future and present dilatation. In the very ancient city of Naples, which for loveliness has not its superior or perhaps its equal in Italy, there once lived a young man, renowned alike for noble blood and the splendor of his vast wealth, his name Ricciardo Minutolo. He was mated with a very fair and loving wife, but nevertheless he became enamored of a lady who in the general opinion vastly surpassed in beauty every other lady in Naples. Atella, such was the lady's name, was married to a young man, likewise of gentle blood, Filippo Fiancolfic by name, whom she, most virtuous of ladies, loved and held dear above all else in the world. Being thus enamored of Catella, Ricciardo Minutolo left none of those means untried whereby a lady's favor and love were wont to be gained, but for all that he made no way towards the attainment of his heart's desire, whereby he fell into a sort of despair, and witless and powerless to loose himself from his love, found life scarce tolerable, and yet knew not how to die. While in this frame he languished, it befell one day that some ladies that were of kin to him counselled him earnestly to be quit of such a love, whereby he could but fret himself to no purpose, seeing that Atella cared for naught in the world save Filipello, and lived in such a state of jealousy on his account that never a bird flew but she feared lest it should snatch him from her. So soon as Ricciardo heard of Catella's jealousy, he forthwith began to ponder how he might make it subserve his end. He feigned to have given up his love for Catella as hopeless, and to have transferred it to another lady, in whose honor he accordingly began to tilt and joust and do all that he had been wont to do in honor of Catella. Nor was it long before well nigh all the Neapolitans, including Catella herself, began to think that he had forgotten Catella, and was to the last degree enamored of the other lady. In this course he persisted, until the opinion was so firmly rooted in the minds of all that even Atella laid aside a certain reserve which she had used towards him while she deemed him her lover, and, coming and going, greeted him in friendly, neighborly fashion, like the rest. Now it so befell that during the hot season, when, according to the custom of the Neapolitans, many companies of ladies and gentlemen went down to the sea-coast to recreate themselves and breakfast and sup, Ricciardo, knowing that Atella was gone thither with her company, went likewise with his, but, making as if he were not minded to stay there, he received several invitations from the ladies of Catella's company before he accepted any. When the ladies received him, they all with one accord, including Catella, began to rally him on his new love, and he furnished them with more matter for talk by feigning a most ardent passion. At length most of the ladies being gone off, one hither, another thither, as they do in such places, leaving Catella and a few others with Ricciardo, he tossed at Atella a light allusion to a certain love of her husband Filipello, which drew her at once into such a fit of jealousy, that she inly burned with a vehement desire to know what Ricciardo meant. For a while she kept her own counsel, then, brooking no more suspense, she adjured Ricciardo, by the love he bore the lady whom most he loved, to expound to her what he had said touching Filipello. He answered thus: "You have adjured me by her to whom I dare not deny aught that you may ask of me my riddle, therefore I will presently read you, provided you promise me that neither to him nor to anyone else will you impart aught of what I shall relate to you, until you shall have all or evidence of its truth, which, so you desire it, I will teach you how you may obtain." The lady accepted his terms, which rather confirmed her belief in his veracity, and swore that she would not tell a soul. They then drew a little apart, that they might not be overheard by the rest, and Ricciardo thus began: "Madam, did I love you, as I once did, I should not dare to tell you aught that I thought might cause you pain, but, now that that love is past, I shall have the less hesitation in telling you the truth. Whether Filipello ever resented the love which I bore you, or deemed that it was returned by you, I know not. Whether it were so or no, he certainly never shewed any such feeling to me, but so it is that now, having waited, perhaps, until, as he supposes, I am less likely to be on my guard, he shews a disposition to serve me as I doubt he suspects that I served him, that is to say, he would fain have his pleasure of my wife, whom for some time past he has, as I discover, plied with messages through most secret channels. She has told me all, and has answered him according to my instructions, but only this morning, just before I came hither, I found a woman in close parley with her in the house, whose true character and purpose I forthwith divined, so I called my wife, and asked what the woman wanted. Whereto she answered, "'Tis this persecution by Filipello which thou hast brought upon me by the encouraging answers that thou wouldst have me give him. He now tells me that he is most earnestly desirous to know my intentions, and that, should I be so minded, he would contrive that I should have secret access to a bagnio in this city, and he is most urgent and instant that I should consent. And hadst thou not, wherefore I know not, bidden me keep the affair afoot, I would have dismissed him in such a sort that my movements would have been exempt from his prying observation forever. Upon this I saw that the affair was going too far. I determined to have no more of it, and to let you know it, that you may understand how he requites your wholehearted faith, which brought me of late to the verge of death. and that you may not suppose that these are but empty words and idle tales, but may be able, should you so desire, to verify them by sight and touch. I caused my wife to tell the woman who still waited her answer, that she would be at the bagnio tomorrow about noon, during the siesta, with which answer the woman went away well content. Now you do not, I suppose, imagine that I would send her thither, but if I were in your place, he should find me there instead of her whom he thinks to find there, and when I had been some little time with him, I would give him to understand with whom he had been, and he should have of me such honor as he deserved, whereby, I doubt not, he would be put to such shame as would at one and the same time avenge both the wrong which he has done to you and that which he plots against me. Atella, as is the wont of the jealous, hearkened to Ricciardo's words without so much as giving a thought to the speaker or his wiles, inclined at once to credit his story, and began to twist certain antecedent matters into accord with it. Then, suddenly kindling with wrath, she answered that to the bagnio she would certainly go to would cause her no great inconvenience, and if he should come, she would so shame him that he should never again set eyes on woman, but his ears would tingle. Satisfied by what he heard, that his stratagem was well conceived, and success sure, Ricciardo added much in corroboration of his story, and having thus confirmed her belief in it, besought her to keep it always close, whereto she pledged her faith. Next morning Ricciardo hied him to the good woman that kept the bagnio to which he had directed Atella, told her the enterprise which he had in hand, and prayed her to aid him therein so far as she might be able. The good woman, who was much beholden to him, assured him that she would gladly do so, and concerted with him all that was to be said and done. She had in the bagnio a room which was very dark, being without any window to admit the light. This room, by Ricciardo's direction, she set in order, and made up a bed there as well as she could, into which bed Ricciardo got, as soon as he had breakfasted, and there awaited Atella's coming. Now Atella, still giving more credence to Ricciardo's story than it merited, had gone home in the evening in a most resentful mood, and Filippo, returning home the same evening with a mind greatly preoccupied, was scarce as familiar with her as he was wont to be, which she marking, grew yet more suspicious than before, and said to herself, doubtless he is thinking of the lady of whom he expects to take his pleasure tomorrow, as most assuredly he shall not, and so, musing and meditating what she should say to him after their rencounter at the bagnio, she spent the best part of the night. But to shorten my story upon the stroke of nun Atella, taking with her a single attendant, but otherwise adhering to her original intention, hied her to the bagnio which Ricciardo had indicated, and finding the good woman there, asked her whether Filippo had been there that day. Primed by Ricciardo, the good woman asked her whether she were the lady that was to come to speak with him, to which she answered in the affirmative. Go to him then, said the good woman. And so Atella, in quest of that which she would gladly not have found, was shewn to the chamber where Ricciardo was, and having entered without uncovering her head, closed the door behind her. Overjoyed to see her, Ricciardo sprang out of bed, took her in his arms, and said caressingly, Welcome, my soul. Atella, dissembling, for she was minded at first to counterfeit another woman, returned his embrace, kissed him, and lavished endearments upon him, saying, the while, not a word, lest her speech should betray her. The darkness of the room, which was profound, was equally welcome to both, nor were they there long enough for their eyes to recover power. Ricciardo helped Atella onto the bed, where, with no word said on either side in a voice that might be recognized, they lay a long while, much more to the solace and satisfaction of the one than of the other party. Then, Atella, deeming it high time to vent her harbored resentment, burst forth in a blaze of wrath on this wise. Alas! How wretched is the lot of women, how misplaced of not a few the love they bear their husbands. Ah, woe is me! For 8 years have I loved thee more dearly than my life, and now I find that thou, base miscreant that thou art, dost not but burn and languish for love of another woman. Here thou hast been with whom, thinkest thou? Even with her whom thou hast too long deluded with thy false blandishments, making pretence to love her while thou art enamoured of another. 'Tis I, Attila, not the wife of Ricciardo, false traitor that thou art. List if thou knowest my voice, 'tis I indeed. Ah, would we were but in the light! It seems to me 1,000 years till then that I might shame thee as thou deservest, vile, pestilent dog that thou art. Alas! Woe is me! Such love as I have borne so many years to whom? To this faithless dog, that, thinking to have a strange woman in his embrace, has in the brief while that I have been with him here lavished upon me more caresses and endearments than during all the forepast time that I have been his. A lively spark indeed art thou today, renegade dog, that shewest thyself so limp and enervate and impotent at home. But, God be praised, thou hast held thine own plot, and not another's, as thou didst believe. No wonder that last night thou heldest aloof from me. Thou wast thinking of scattering thy seed elsewhere, and wast minded to shew thyself a lusty knight when thou shouldst join battle. But praise be to God and my sagacity, the water has nevertheless taken its proper course. Where is thy answer, culprit? Hast thou naught to say? Have my words struck thee dumb? God's faith, I know not why I forbear to pluck thine eyes out with my fingers. Thou thoughtest to perpetrate this treason with no small secrecy, but, by God, one is as knowing as another. Thy plot has failed. I had better hounds on thy trail than thou didst think for. Ricciardo, inly delighted by her words, made no answer, but embraced and kissed her more than ever, and overwhelmed her with his endearments. So she continued her reproaches, saying, Ay, thou thinkest to cajole me with thy feigned caresses, wearisome dog that thou art, and so to pacify and mollify me. But thou art mistaken. I shall never be mollified, until I have covered thee with infamy in the presence of all our kinsfolk and friends and neighbors. Am I not, miscreant, as fair as the wife of Ricciardo Minutolo? Am I not as good a lady as she? Why dost not answer, vile dog? Wherein has she the advantage of me? Away with thee! Touch me not. Thou hast done feats of arms more than enough for today. Well I know that, now that thou knowest who I am, thou wilt wreak thy will on me by force, but by God's grace I will yet disappoint thee. I know not why I forbear to send for Ricciardo, who loved me more than himself and yet was never able to boast that he had a single glance from me, nor know I why 'twere wrong to do so. Thou thoughtest to have his wife here, and 'tis no fault of thine that thou hadst her not. So, if I had him, thou oughtst not justly blame me. Enough had now been said. The lady's mortification was extreme, and, as she ended, Ricciardo bethought him that, if he suffered her, thus deluded, to depart, much evil might ensue. He therefore resolved to make himself known, and disabuse her of her error. So, taking her in his arms, and clipping her so close that she could not get loose, he said, Sweet my soul, be not wroth. That which, while heartlessly I loved, I might not have. Love has taught me to compass by guile. Know that I am thy Ricciardo. At these words and the voice, which she recognized, Attila started, and would have sprung out of the bed, which being impossible, she essayed a cry, but Ricciardo laid a hand upon her mouth, and closed it, saying, Madam, that which is done can never be undone, though you should cry out for the rest of your days, and should you in such or any other wise publish this matter to any, two consequences will ensue. In the first place, and this is a point which touches you very nearly, your honor and fair fame will be blasted, for, however you may say that I lured you hither by guile, I shall deny it, and affirm, on the contrary, that I induced you to come hither by promises of money and gifts, and that 'tis but because you were vexed that what I gave you did not altogether come up to your expectations, that you make such a cry and clamor. And you know that folk are more prone to believe evil than good, and therefore I am no less likely to be believed than you. The further consequence will be mortal enmity between your husband and me, and the event were as like to be that I killed him as that he killed me, which if I did you would never more know joy or peace. Wherefore, heart of my body, do not at one and the same time bring dishonor upon yourself and set your husband and me at strife and in jeopardy of our lives. You are not the first, nor will you be the last to be beguiled, nor have I beguiled you to rob you of aught, but for excess of love that I bear, and shall ever bear, you, being your most lowly vassal. And though it is now a great while that I, and what I have and can and am worth, or yours, yet I am minded that so it shall be henceforth more than ever before. Your discretion in other matters is not unknown to me, and I doubt not 'twill be equally manifest in this. Ricciardo's admonitions were received by Catullus with many a bitter tear, but though she was very wroth and very sad at heart, yet Ricciardo's true words so far commanded the assent of her reason, that she acknowledged that 'twas possible they might be verified by the event. Wherefore she made answer, Ricciardo, I know not how God will grant me patience to bear the villainy and knavery which thou hast practiced upon me, and though in this place, to which simplicity and excess of jealousy guided my steps, I raise no cry, rest assured that I shall never be happy, until in one way or another I know myself avenged of that which thou hast done to me. Wherefore unhand me, let me go. Thou hast had thy desire of me, and hast tormented me to thy heart's content. 'Tis time to release me, let me go, I pray thee. But Ricciardo, seeing that she was still much ruffled in spirit, was resolved not to let her go, until he had made his peace with her. So he addressed himself to soothe her, and by dint of most dulcet phrases and entreaties and adjurations he did at last prevail with her to give him her pardon. Nay, by joint consent, they tarried there a great while, to the exceeding great delight of both. Indeed the lady, finding her lover's kisses smack much better than those of her husband, converted her asperity into sweetness, and from that day forth cherished a most tender love for Ricciardo, whereof, using all circumspection, they many a time had solace. God grant us solace of ours. Novel 7. Tedaldo, being in disfavor with his lady, departs from Florence. He returns thither after a while in the guise of a pilgrim, has speech of his lady, and makes her sensible of her fault. Her husband, convicted of slaying him, he delivers from peril of death, reconciles him with his brothers, and thereafter discreetly enjoys his lady. So ceased Ficametta, and, when all had bestowed on her their meed of praise, the queen, to lose no time, forthwith bade Emilia resume the narration. So thus Emilia began, I am minded to return to our city, whence my two last predecessors saw fit to depart, and to shew you how one of our citizens recovered the lady he had lost. Know then that there was in Florence a young noble, his name Tedaldo, who being beyond measure enamoured of a lady hight Monna Ermelina, wife of one Aldobrandino Palomini, and by reason of his admirable qualities richly deserving to have his desire, found fortune nevertheless adverse, as she is wont to be to the prosperous. Inasmuch as, for some reason or another, the lady, having shewn herself gracious towards Tedaldo for a while, completely altered her mien, and not only shewed him no further favor, but would not so much as receive a message from him or suffer him to see her face, whereby he fell a prey to a grievous and distressful melancholy. But so well had he concealed his love that the cause of his melancholy was surmised by none. He tried hard in divers ways to recover the love which he deemed himself to have lost for no fault of his, and finding all his efforts unavailing, he resolved to bid the world adieu, that he might not afford her who was the cause of his distress the satisfaction of seeing him languish. So he got together as much money as he might, and secretly, no word said to friend or kinsman except only a familiar gossip, who knew all, he took his departure for Ancona. Arrived there, he assumed the name of Filippo Santadetto, and having foregathered with a rich merchant, entered his service. The merchant took him with him to Cyprus aboard one of his ships, and was so well pleased with his bearing and behavior that he not only gave him a handsome salary, but made him in a sort his companion, and entrusted him with the management of no small part of his affairs, wherein he proved himself so apt and assiduous, that in the course of a few years he was himself established in credit and wealth and great repute as a merchant. 7 years thus passed, during which, albeit his thoughts frequently reverted to his cruel mistress, and sorely love smote him, and much he yearned to see her again, yet such was his firmness that he came off conqueror, until one day in Cyprus it so befell that there was sung in his hearing a song that he had himself composed, and of which the theme was the mutual love that was between his lady and him, and the delight that he had of her, which as he heard, he found it incredible that she should have forgotten him, and burned with such a desire to see her once more, that, being able to hold out no longer, he made up his mind to return to Florence. So, having set all his affairs in order, he betook him, attended only by a single servant, to Ancona, whence he sent all his effects, as they arrived, forward to Florence, consigning them to a friend of his and Canton partner, and followed with his servant in the disguise of a pilgrim returned from the Holy Sepulchre. Arrived at Florence, he put up at a little hostelry kept by two brothers hard by his lady's house, whither he forthwith hailed him, hoping that, perchance, he might have sight of her from the street, but, finding all barred and bolted, doors, windows and all else, he doubted much, she must be dead, or have removed thence. So, with a very heavy heart, he returned to the house of the two brothers, and to his great surprise found his own 4 brothers standing in front of it, all in black. He knew that he was so changed from his former semblance, both in dress and in person, that he might not readily be recognized, and he had therefore no hesitation in going up to a shoemaker and asking him why these men were all dressed in black. The shoemaker answered, "'Tis because 'tis not 15 days since a brother of theirs, Tebaldo by name, that had been long abroad, was slain, and I understand that they have proved in court that one Aldobrandino Palamini, who is under arrest, did the deed, because Tebaldo, who loved his wife, was come back to Florence incognito to foregather with her." Tebaldo found it passing strange that there should be any one so like him as to be mistaken for him, and deplored Aldobrandino's evil plight. He had learned, however, that the lady was alive and well. So, as 'twas now night, he hied him, much perplexed in mind, into the inn, and supped with his servant. The bedroom assigned him was almost at the top of the house, and the bed was none of the best. Thoughts many and disquieting haunted his mind, and his supper had been but light, whereby it befell that midnight came and went, and Tebaldo was still awake. As thus he watched, he heard shortly after midnight, a noise as of persons descending from the roof into the house, and then through the chinks of the door of his room he caught the flicker of an ascending light, wherefore he stole softly to the door, and peeping through a chink to make out what was afoot, he saw a very fine young woman bearing a light, and 3 men making towards her, being evidently those that had descended from the roof. The men exchanged friendly greetings with the young woman, and then one said to her, "Now, God be praised, we may make our minds easy, for we are well assured that judgment for the death of Tebaldo Elisate is gotten by his brothers against Aldobrandino Palamini, and he has confessed, and the sentence is already drawn up, but still it behoves us to hold our peace, for, should it ever get abroad that we were guilty, we shall stand in the like jeopardy as Aldobrandino." So saying, they took leave of the woman, who seemed much cheered, and went to bed. What he had heard set Tebaldo musing on the number and variety of the errors to which men are liable, as, first, how his brothers had mourned and interred a stranger in his stead, and then charged an innocent man upon false suspicion, and by false witness brought him into imminent peril of death, from which he passed to ponder the blind severity of laws and magistrates, who from misguided zeal to elicit the truth not unfrequently become ruthless, and, adjudging that which is false, forfeit the title which they claim of ministers of God and justice, and do but execute the mandates of iniquity and the evil one. And so he came at last to consider the possibility of saving Aldobrandino, and formed a plan for the purpose. Accordingly, on the morrow, when he was risen, he left his servant at the inn, and hied him alone, at what he deemed a convenient time, to his lady's house, where, finding, by chance, the door open, he entered, and saw his lady sitting, all tears and lamentations, in a little parlor on the ground floor. Whereat he all but wept for sympathy, and drawing near her, he said, "Madam, be not troubled in spirit, your peace is nigh you." Whereupon the lady raised her head, and said between her sobs, "Good man, what dost thou, a pilgrim, if I mistake not, from distant parts, know either of my peace or of my affliction?" "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "I am of Constantinople, and am but now come hither, at God's behest, that I may give you laughter for tears, and deliver your husband from death. But, said the lady, if thou art of Constantinople, and but now arrived, how is that thou knowest either who my husband is, or who I am? Whereupon the pilgrim gave her the whole narrative, from the very beginning, of Aldobrandino's sufferings. He also told her who she was, how long she had been married, and much besides that was known to him of her affairs, whereat the lady was lost in wonder, and, taking him to be a prophet, threw herself on her knees at his feet, and besought him for God's sake, if he were come to save Aldobrandino, to lose no time, for the matter brooked no delay. Thus adjured, the pilgrim assumed an air of great sanctity, as he said, Arise, madam, weep not, but hearken diligently to what I shall say to you, and look to it that you impart it to none. I have it by revelation of God that the tribulation wherein you stand is come upon you in requital of a sin which you did once commit, of which God is minded that this suffering be a partial purgation, and that you make reparation in full, if you would not find yourself in a far more grievous plight. Sir, replied the lady, many sins have I committed, nor know I how among them all to single out that whereof, more than another, God requires reparation at my hands. Wherefore, if you know it, tell it me, and what by way of reparation I may do, that will I do. Madam, returned the pilgrim, well what it is, nor shall I question you thereof for my better instruction, but that the rehearsal may give you increase of remorse therefore. But pass we now to fact. Tell me, mind you ever to have had a lover? Whereat the lady heaved a deep sigh then, marvelling not a little, for she had thought 'twas known to none, albeit on the day when the man was slain, who was afterwards buried as Tebaldo, there had been some buzz about it, occasioned by some indiscreet words dropped by Tebaldo's gossip and confidant. She made answer, I see that there is naught that men keep secret, but God reveals it to you, wherefore I shall not endeavor to hide my secrets from you. True it is that in my youth I was beyond measure enamored of the unfortunate young man whose death is imputed to my husband, whom I mourned with grief unfeigned. For, albeit I shewed myself harsh and cruel towards him before his departure, yet neither thereby, nor by his long absence, nor yet by his calamitous death was my heart estranged from him. Then said the pilgrim, 'Twas not the unfortunate young man now dead that you did love, but Tebaldo LSA. But let that pass now. Tell me, wherefore lost he your good graces? Did he ever offend you? Nay verily, answered the lady, he never offended me at all. My harshness was prompted by an accursed friar, to whom I once confessed, and who, when I told him of the love I bore Tebaldo, and my intimacy with him, made my ears so tingle and sing that I still shudder to think of it, warning me that, if I gave it not up, I should fall into the jaws of the devil in the abyss of hell, and be cast into the avenging fire. Whereby I was so terrified that I quite made my mind up to discontinue my intimacy with him, and, to trench the matter, I would thenceforth have none of his letters or messages, and so, I suppose, he went away in despair, though I doubt not, had he persevered a while longer, I should not have seen him wasting away like snow in sunshine without relenting of my harsh resolve, for in sooth there was nothing in the world I would so gladly have done. Then said the pilgrim, Madam, 'tis this sin, and this only, that has brought upon you your present tribulation. I know positively that Tebaldo did never put force upon you, 'twas of your own free will, and for that he pleased you, that you became enamored of him, your constant visitor, your intimate friend he became, because you yourself would have it so, and in the course of your intimacy you shewed him such favor by word and deed that, if he loved you first, you multiplied his love full 1,000-fold. And if so it was, and well I know it was so, what justification had you for thus harshly severing yourself from him? You should have considered the whole matter before the die was cast, and not have entered upon it, if you deemed you might have cause to repent you of it as a sin. As soon as he became yours you became his. Had he not been yours, you might have acted as you had thought fit, at your own unfettered discretion, but, as you were his, 'twas robbery, 'twas conduct most disgraceful, to sever yourself from him against his will. Now you must know that I am a friar, and therefore all the ways of friars are familiar to me, nor does it misbecome me, as it might another, to speak for your behoof somewhat freely of them as I am minded to do, that you may have better understanding of them in the future than you would seem to have had in the past. Time was when the friars were most holy and worthy men, but those who today take the name and claim the reputation of friars have naught of the friar save only the habit. Nay, they have not even that. For, whereas their founders ordained that their habits should be straight, of a sorry sort, and of coarse stuff, apt symbols of a soul that in arraying the body in so mean a garb did despite to all things temporal, our modern friars will have them full, and double, and resplendent, and of the finest stuff, and of a fashion goodly and pontifical, wherein without shame they flaunt it like peacocks in the church, in the piazza, even as do the laity in their robes. And as the fisherman casts his net into the stream with intent to take many fish at one throw, so 'tis the main solicitude and study, art and craft of these friars to embrace and entangle within the ample folds of their vast swelling skirts beguines, widows and other foolish women, and men likewise in great number. Wherefore, to speak with more exactitude, the friars of today have naught of the habit of the friar save only the color thereof. And, whereas the friars of old time sought to win men to their salvation, those of today seek to win their women and their wealth, wherefore they have made it and make it their sole concern by delimation and imagery to strike terror into the souls of fools, and to make believe that sins are purged by alms and masses, to the end that they, base wretches that have fled to frigorage not to ensue holiness but to escape hardship, may receive from this man bread, from that man wine, and from the other man a donation for masses for the souls of his dead. True indeed it is that sins are purged by almsgiving and prayer, but, did they who give the alms know, did they but understand to whom they give them, they would be more apt to keep them to themselves, or throw them to so many pigs. And, knowing that the fewer be they that share great riches, the greater their ease, 'tis the study of each how best by delimation and intimidation to oust others from that whereof he would fain be the sole owner. They censure lust in men, that, they turning therefrom, the sole use of their women may remain to the censors. They condemn usury and unlawful gains, that, being entrusted with the restitution thereof, they may be able to enlarge their habits, and to purchase bishoprics and other great preferments with the very money which they have made believe must bring its possessor to perdition. And when they are taxed with these and many other disreputable practices, they deem that there is no censure, however grave, of which they may not be quit by their glib formula, follow our precepts not our practice, as if 'twere possible that the sheep should be of a more austere and rigid virtue than the shepherds. And how many of these, whom they put off with this formula, understand it not in the way in which they enunciate it? Not a few of them know. The friars of today would have you follow their precepts, that is to say, they would have you fill their purses with coin, confide to them your secrets, practice continence, be long-suffering, forgive those that trespass against you, keep yourselves from evil speaking, all which things are good, seemly, holy. But to what end? To the end that they may be able to do that which, if the laity do it, they will not be able to do. Who knows not that idleness cannot subsist without money? Spend thy money on thy pleasures, and the friar will not be able to live in sloth in his order. Go after women, and there will be no place for the friar. Be not long-suffering, pardon not the wrong door, and the friar will not dare to cross thy threshold to corrupt thy family. But wherefore pursue I the topic through every detail? They accuse themselves as often as they so excuse themselves in the hearing of all that have understanding. Why seclude they not themselves, if they misdoubt their power to lead continent and holy lives? Or if they must needs not live as rivulses, why follow they not that other holy text of the gospel, Christ began to do and to teach? Let them practice first, and school us with their precepts afterwards. 1,000 such have I seen in my day, admirers, lovers, philanderers, not of ladies of the world alone, but of nuns, and they too such as made the most noise in the pulpits. Is it such as they that we are to follow? He that does so pleases himself, but God knows if he do wisely. But assume that herein we must allow that your censor, the friar, spoke truth, to wit, that none may break the marriage vow without very grave sin. What then? To rob a man, to slay him, to make of him an exile and a wanderer on the face of the earth, are not these yet greater sins? None will deny that so they are. A woman that indulges herself in the intimate use with a man commits but a sin of nature, but if she rob him, or slay him, or drive him out into exile, her sin proceeds from depravity of spirit. That you did rob Tedeldo, I have already shewn you, in that, having of your own free will become his, you reft you from him. I now go further and say that, so far as in you lay, you slew him, seeing that, shewing yourself ever more and more cruel, you did your utmost to drive him to take his own life, and in the law's intent he that is the cause that wrong is done is as culpable as he that does it. Nor is it deniable that you were the cause that for 7 years he has been in exile, and a wanderer upon the face of the earth. Wherefore upon each of the said 3 articles you are found guilty of a greater crime than you committed by your intimacy with him. But consider we the matter more closely, perchance Tedeldo merited such treatment? Nay, but assuredly 'twas not so. You have yourself so confessed, besides which I know that he loves you more dearly than himself. He would laud, he would extol, he would magnify you above all other ladies so as never was heard the like, wheresoever 'twas seemly for him to speak of you, and it might be done without exciting suspicion. All his bliss, all his honor, all his liberty he avowed was entirely in your disposal. Was he not of noble birth? And for beauty might he not compare with the rest of his townsfolk? Did he not excel in all the exercises and accomplishments proper to youth? Was he not beloved, held dear, well seen of all men? You will not deny it. How then could you at the behest of a paltry friar, silly, brutish and envious, bring yourself to deal with him in any harsh sort? I cannot estimate the error of those ladies who look askance on men and hold them cheap, whereas, bethinking them of what they are themselves, and what and how great is the nobility with which God has endowed man above all the other animals, they ought rather to glory in the love which men give them, and hold them most dear, and with all zeal study to please them, that so their love may never fail. In what sort you did so, instigated by the chatter of a friar, some broch gosling, pastry gorging knave without a doubt, you know, and peradventure his purpose was but to install himself in the place whence he sought to oust another. This then is the sin which the divine justice, which, ever operative, suffers no perturbation of its even balance, or arrest of judgment, has decreed not to leave unpunished. Wherefore, as without due cause you devised how you might despoil Tedeldo of yourself, so without due cause your husband has been placed and is in jeopardy of his life on Tedeldo's account, and to your sore affliction. Wherefrom if you would be delivered, there is that which you must promise, and much more which you must perform, to wit, that, should it ever betide that Tedeldo return hither from his long exile, you will restore to him your favor, your love, your tender regard, your intimacy, and reinstate him in the position which he held before you foolishly hearkened to the half-witted friar. Thus ended the pilgrim and the lady, who had followed him with the closest attention, deeming all that he advanced very sound, and doubting not that her tribulation was, as he said, in requital of her sin, spoke thus: Friend of God, well I wot that the matters which you discourse are true, and, thanks to your delineation, I now in great measure know what manner of men are the friars, whom I have hitherto regarded as all alike holy, nor doubt I that great was my fault in the course which I pursued towards Tedeldo, and gladly, were it in my power, would I make reparation in the manner which you have indicated. But how is this feasible? Tedeldo can never return to us. He is dead. Wherefore I know not why I must needs give you a promise which cannot be performed. Madam, returned the pilgrim, 'tis revealed to me by God that Tedeldo is by no means dead, but alive and well and happy, so only he enjoyed your favor. Nay, but, said the lady, speak advisedly. I saw his body done to death by more than one knife wound. I folded it in these arms, and drenched the dead face with many a tear, whereby, perchance, I gave occasion for the bruit that has been made to my disadvantage. Say what you may, madam, rejoined the pilgrim, I assure you that Tedeldo lives, and if you will but give the promise, then, for its fulfillment, I have good hope that you will soon see him. Whereupon, I give the promise, said the lady, and right gladly will I make it good, nor is there aught that might happen that would yield me such delight as to see my husband free and scathless, and Tetaldo alive. Tetaldo now deemed it wise to make himself known, and establish the lady in a more sure hope of her husband's safety. Wherefore he said, Madam, to set your mind at ease in regard of your husband, I must first impart to you a secret, which be mindful to disclose to none so long as you live. Then for such was the confidence which the lady reposed in the pilgrim's apparent sanctity that they were by themselves in a place remote from observation. Tetaldo drew forth a ring which he had guarded with the most jealous care, since it had been given him by the lady on the last night when they were together, and said, as he shewed it to her, Madam, know you this? The lady recognized it forthwith, and answered, I do, sir, I gave it long ago to Tetaldo. Then the pilgrim, rising and throwing off his slavine and hat, said with the Florentine accent, And know you me? The lady, recognizing forthwith the form and semblance of Tetaldo, was struck dumb with wonder and fear as of a corpse that is seen to go about as if alive, and was much rather disposed to turn and flee from Tetaldo returned from the tomb than to come forward and welcome Tetaldo aright from Cyprus. But when Tetaldo said to her, Fear not, madam, your Tetaldo am I, alive and well, nor was I ever dead, whatever you and my brothers may think, the lady, partly awed, partly reassured by his voice, regarded him with rather more attention, and inly affirming that 'twas in very truth Tetaldo, threw herself upon his neck, and wept, and kissed him, saying, Sweet my Tetaldo, welcome home. Madam, replied Tetaldo after he had kissed and embraced her, time serves not now for greetings more intimate. 'Tis for me to be up and doing, that Aldobrandino may be restored to you safe and sound, touching which matter you will, I trust, before tomorrow at even hear tidings that will gladden your heart. Indeed I expect to have good news tonight, and, if so, will come and tell you when I shall be less straitened than I am at present. He then resumed his slavine and hat, and having kissed the lady again, and bade her be of good cheer, took his leave, and hied him to the prison, where Aldobrandino lay more occupied with apprehension of imminent death than hope of deliverance to come. As ministrant of consolation, he gained ready admittance of the warders, and, seating himself by Aldobrandino's side, he said, Aldobrandino, in me thou seest a friend sent thee by God, who is touched with pity of thee by reason of thy innocence. Wherefore, if in reverent submission to him thou wilt grant me a slight favor that I shall ask of thee, without fail, before tomorrow at even, thou shalt, in lieu of the doom of death that thou awaitest, hear thy acquittal pronounced. Worthy man, replied Aldobrandino, I know thee not, nor mind I ever to have seen thee. Wherefore, as thou shewest thyself solicitous for my safety, my friend indeed thou must needs be, even as thou sayest. And in sooth the crime, for which they say I ought to be doomed to death, I never committed, though others enough I have committed, which perchance have brought me to this extremity. However, if so be that God has now pity on me, this I tell thee in reverent submission to him, that, whereas 'tis but a little thing that thou reddest of me, there is not, however great, but I would not only promise but gladly do it. Wherefore, even ask what thou wilt, and, if so be that I escape, I will without fail keep my word to the letter. Nay, returned the pilgrim, I ask but this of thee, that thou pardon Tetaldo's 4 brothers, that in the belief that thou wast guilty of their brother's death they brought thee to this strait, and, so they ask thy forgiveness, account them as thy brothers and friends. How sweet, replied Aldobrandino, is the savor, how ardent the desire, of vengeance, none knows but he that is wronged. But yet, so God may take thought for my deliverance, I will gladly pardon, nay, I do now pardon them, and if I go hence alive and free, I will thenceforth have them in such regard as shall content thee. Satisfied with this answer, the pilgrim, without further parley, heartily exhorted Aldobrandino to be of good cheer, assuring him that, before the next day was done, he should be certified beyond all manner of doubt of his deliverance, and so he left him. On quitting the prison the pilgrim hied him forthwith to the seigneury, and being closeted with a knight that was in charge, thus spoke, "My lord, 'tis the duty of all, and most especially of those who hold your place, zealously to bestir themselves that the truth be brought to light, in order as well that those bear not the penalty who have not committed the crime, as that the guilty be punished. And that this may come to pass to your honor and the undoing of the delinquent, I am come hither to you. You what that you have dealt rigorously with Aldobrandino Palomini, and have found, as you think, that 'twas he that slew Tedel de la Lacy, and you are about to condemn him wherein you are most certainly in error, as I doubt not before midnight to prove to you, delivering the murderers into your hands." The worthy knight, who was not without pity for Aldobrandino, readily gave ear to the pilgrim's words. He conversed at large with him, and availing himself of his guidance, made an easy capture of the two brothers that kept the inn and their servant in their first sleep. He was about to put them to torture, to elicit the true state of the case, when, their courage failing, they confessed without the least reserve, severally at first, and then jointly, that 'twas they that had slain Tedel de la Lacy. Not knowing who he was, asked for why, they answered that 'twas because he had sorely harassed the wife of one of them, and would have constrained her to do his pleasure, while they were out of doors. Whereof the pilgrim was no sooner apprised, than by leave of the knight he withdrew, and hied him privily to the house of Madonna Ermelina, whom the rest of the household being gone to bed he found awaiting him alone, and equally anxious for good news of her husband and a complete reconciliation with her Tedeldo. On entering he blithely exclaimed, "Rejoice, dearest my lady, for thou mayst rest assured that tomorrow thou shalt have thy Aldobrandino back here safe and sound." And to confirm her faith in his words, he told her all that he had done. Greater joy was never woman's than hers of two such glad surprises, to wit, to have Tedeldo with her alive again, whom she had wailed for verily dead, and to know Aldobrandino, whom she had thought in no long time to wail for dead, now out of jeopardy. Wherefore, when she had affectionately embraced and kissed her Tedeldo, they hied them to bed together, and with hearty goodwill made gracious and gladsome consummation of their peace by interchange of sweet solace. With the approach of day Tedeldo rose, and having first apprised the lady of his purpose and enjoined her, as before, to keep it most secret, resumed his pilgrim's habit, and sallied forth of her house, to be ready, as occasion should serve, to act in Aldobrandino's interest. As soon as 'twas day, the Signory, deeming themselves amply conversant with the affair, set Aldobrandino at large, and a few days later they caused the malefactors to be beheaded in the place where they had done the murder. Great was Aldobrandino's joy to find himself free, not less great was that of his lady and all his friends and kinsfolk, and as 'twas through the pilgrim that it had come about, they brought him to their house, there to reside as long as he cared to tarry in the city, nor could they do him honor and cheer enough, and most of all the lady, who knew her man. But after a while, seeing that his brothers were not only become a common laughing stock by reason of Aldobrandino's acquittal, but had armed themselves for very fear, he felt that their reconciliation with him brooked no delay, and accordingly craved of him performance of his promise. Aldobrandino replied handsomely that it should be had at once. The pilgrim then bade him arrange for the following day a grand banquet, at which he and his kinsfolk and their ladies were to entertain the four brothers and their ladies, adding that he would himself go forthwith as Aldobrandino's envoy, and bid them welcome to his peace and banquet. All which being approved by Aldobrandino, the pilgrim hied him with all speed to the four brothers, whom by ample, apt and unanswerable argument he readily induced to reinstate themselves in Aldobrandino's friendship by suing for his forgiveness, which done, he bade them and their ladies to breakfast with Aldobrandino on the morrow, and they, being assured of his good faith, were consenting to come. So, on the morrow, at the breakfast hour, Tedeldo's four brothers, still wearing their black, came with certain of their friends to Aldobrandino's house, where he awaited them and, in presence of the company that had been bidden to meet them, laid down their arms, and made surrender to Aldobrandino, asking his pardon of that which they had done against him. Aldobrandino received them compassionately, wept, kissed each on the mouth, and let few words suffice to remit each offense. After them came their sisters and their wives, all habited sadly, and were graciously received by Madonna Ermelina and the other ladies. The guests, men and women alike, found all things ordered at the banquet with magnificence, nor aught unmeet for commendation save the restraint which the yet recent grief, betokened by the sombre garb of Tetaldo's kinsfolk, laid upon speech, wherein some had found matter to except against the banquet and the pilgrim for devising it, as he well knew, but, as he had premeditated, in due time, he stood up, the others being occupied with their dessert, and spoke thus: "Nothing is wanting to complete the gaiety of this banquet except the presence of Tetaldo, whom, as you have been long time with him and have not known him, I will point out to you." So, having divested himself of his slaving and whatever else in his garb denoted the pilgrim, he remained habited in a tunic of green taffeta, in which guise, so great was the wonder with which all regarded him that, though they recognized him, 'twas long before any dared to believe that 'twas actually Tetaldo. Marking their surprise, Tetaldo told them not a little about themselves, their family connections, their recent history, and his own adventures. Whereat his brothers and the rest of the men, all weeping for joy, hasted to embrace him, followed by the women, as well those that were not, as those that were, of kin to him, save only Madonna Ermelina. Which Aldobrandino observing, said, "What is this, Ermelina? How comes it that, unlike the other ladies, thou alone dost Tetaldo no cheer?" "Cheer," replied the lady in the hearing of all, "would I gladly do him such as no other woman has done or could do, seeing that I am more beholden to him than any other woman, and that to him I owe it that I have thee with me again. 'Tis but the words spoken to my disadvantage, while we mourned him that we deemed Tetaldo, that give me pause." "Now out upon thee," said Aldobrandino, "thinkest thou that I heed the yelping of these curs? His zeal for my deliverance has abundantly disproved it, besides which I never believed it. Quick, get thee up and go and embrace him." The lady, who desired nothing better, was in this not slow to obey her husband. She rose forthwith, and embraced Tetaldo as the other ladies had done, and did him gladsome cheer. Tetaldo's brothers and all the company, men and women alike, heartily approved Aldobrandino's handsomeness, and so whatever of despite the rumor had engendered in the minds of any was done away. And, now that all had done him cheer, Tetaldo with his own hands rent his brothers' suits of black upon their backs, as also the sad-hued garments which his sisters and sisters-in-law wore, and bade bring other apparel, which when they had donned, there was no lack of singing, dancing and other sorts of merrymaking, whereby the banquet, for all its subdued beginning, had a sonorous close. Then, just as they were, in the blithest of spirits, they hied them all to Tetaldo's house, where in the evening they supped, and in this manner they held festival for several days. 'Twas some time before the Florentines ceased to look on Tetaldo as a portent, as if he were risen from the dead, and a shadow of doubt whether he were really Tetaldo or no continued to lurk in the minds of not a few, including even his brothers. They had no assured belief, and in that frame had perchance long continued, but for a casual occurrence that shewed them who the murdered man was. It so befell that one day some men-at-arms from Lunigiana passed by their house, and seeing Tetaldo accosted him, saying, "Good morrow to thee, Fazzacolo." To whom Tetaldo, in the presence of his brothers, answered, "You take me for another." Whereat they were abashed, and asked his pardon, saying, "Sooth to tell, you are liker than we ever knew any man like to another, to a comrade of ours, Fazzacolo da Pontremoli by name, who came hither a fortnight ago, or perhaps a little more, since when we have not been able to learn what became of him. Most true it is that your dress surprised us, because he, like ourselves, was a soldier." Whereupon Tetaldo's eldest brother came forward, and asked how their comrade had been accoutred. They told him, and 'twas found to have been exactly as they said, by which and other evidence 'twas established that 'twas Fazzacolo that had been murdered, and not Tetaldo, of whom thenceforth no suspicion lurked in the minds of his brothers or any one else. So, then, Tetaldo returned home very rich, and remained constant in his love, nor did the lady again treat him harshly, but, using discretion, they long had mutual solace of their love. God grant us solace of ours. Novel 8. Ferrando, having taken a certain powder, is interred for dead, is disinterred by the abbot, who enjoys his wife, is put in prison and taught to believe that he is in purgatory, is then resuscitated, and rears as his own a boy begotten by the abbot upon his wife. Ended Emilia's long story, which to none was the less pleasing for its length, but was deemed of all the ladies brief in regard of the number and variety of the events therein recounted. A gesture of the queen sufficed to convey her behest to Loretta, and cause her thus to begin: Dearest ladies, I have it in mind to tell you a true story, which wears far more of the aspect of a lie than of that which it really was. 'Tis brought to my recollection by that which we have heard of one being bewailed and buried in lieu of another. My story then is of one that, living, was buried for dead, and after believed with many others that he came out of the tomb not as one that had not died, but as one risen from the dead, whereby he was venerated as a saint who ought rather to have been condemned as a criminal. Know then that there was and still is in Tuscany an abbey, situate, as we see not a few, in a somewhat solitary spot, wherein the office of abbot was held by a monk, who in all other matters ordered his life with great sanctity, save only in the commerce with women, and therein knew so well how to cloak his indulgence, that scarce any there were that so much as suspected, not to say detected it, so holy and just was he reputed in all matters. Now the abbot consorted much with a very wealthy contadino, Ferrando by name, a man coarse and gross beyond measure, whose friendship the abbot only cared for because of the opportunities which it afforded of deriving amusement from his simplicity. And during their intercourse the abbot discovered that Ferrando had a most beautiful wife, of whom he became so hotly enamored that he could think of naught else either by day or by night. But learning that, however simple and inept in all other matters, Ferrando shewed excellent good sense in cherishing and watching over this wife of his, he almost despaired. However, being very astute, he prevailed so far with Ferrando, that he would sometimes bring his wife with him to take a little recreation in the Abbey garden, where he discoursed to them with all lowliness of the blessedness of life eternal, and the most pious works of many men and women of times past, insomuch that the lady conceived a desire to confess to him, and craved and had Ferrando's leave therefore. So, to the abbot's boundless delight, the lady came and seated herself at his feet to make her confession, whereto she prefixed the following exordium: If God, sir, had given me a husband, or had not permitted me to have one, perchance 'twould be easy for me, under your guidance, to enter the way, of which you have spoken, that leads to life eternal. But, considering what manner of man Ferrando is, and his stupidity, I may call myself a widow, while yet I am married, in that, so long as he lives, I may have no other husband, and he, full that he is without the least cause so inordinately jealous of me that 'tis not possible but that my life with him be one of perpetual tribulation and woe. Wherefore, before I address myself to make further confession, I in all humility beseech you to be pleased to give me some counsel of this matter, for here or nowhere is to be found the source of the amelioration of my life, and if it be not found, neither confession nor any other good work will be of any avail. The abbot was overjoyed to hear her thus speak, deeming that fortune had opened a way to the fulfillment of his heart's desire. Wherefore he said, My daughter, I doubt not that 'tis a great affliction to a lady, fair and delicate as you are, to have a fool for a husband, and still more so he should be jealous, and as your husband is both the one and the other, I readily credit what you say of your tribulation. But, to come to the point, I see no resource or remedy in this case, save this only, that Ferrando be cured of his jealousy. The medicine that shall cure him I know very well how to devise, but it behoves you to keep secret what I am about to tell you. Doubt not of it, my father, said the lady, for I had rather suffer death than tell any aught that you forbade me to tell. But the medicine, how is it to be devised? If we would have him cured, replied the abbot, it can only be by his going to purgatory. And how may that be? Returned the lady, can he go thither while he yet lives? He must die, answered the abbot, and so he will go thither, and when he has suffered pain enough to be cured of his jealousy, We have certain prayers with which we will supplicate God to restore him to life, and he will do so." "Then," said the lady, "am I to remain a widow?" "Yes," replied the abbot, "for a certain time, during which you must be very careful not to let yourself be married to another, because two would offend God, and when Furcando was restored to life, you would have to go back to him, and he would be more jealous than ever." "Be it so then," said the lady, "if he be but cured of his jealousy, and so I be not doomed to pass the rest of my days in prison, I shall be content. Do as you think best." "And so will I," said the abbot, "but what reward shall I have for such a service?" "My father," said the lady, "what you please, so only it be in my power. But what may the like of me do that may be acceptable to a man such as you?" "Madam," replied the abbot, "'tis in your power to do no less for me than I am about to do for you, as that which I am minded to do will ensure your comfort and consolation, so there is that which you may do which will be the deliverance and salvation of my life." "If so it be," said the lady, "I shall not be found wanting." "In that case," said the abbot, "you will give me your love, and gratify my passion for you, with which I am all fire and wasting away." Whereto the lady, all consternation, replied, "Alas! my father, what is this you crave? I took you for a holy man. Now does it beseem holy men to make such overtures to ladies that come to them for counsel?" "Marvel not, fair my soul," returned the abbot, "hereby is my holiness in no wise diminished, for holiness resides in the soul, and this which I ask of you is but a sin of the flesh. But, however it may be, such is the might of your bewitching beauty, that love constrains me thus to act. And, let me tell you, good cause have you to vaunt you of your beauty more than other women, in that it delights the saints, who are used to contemplate celestial beauties. Whereto I may add that, albeit I am an abbot, yet I am a man even as others, and, as you see, not yet old. Nor need this matter seem formidable to you, but rather to be anticipated with pleasure, for, while Furcando is in purgatory, I shall be your nightly companion, and will give you such solace as he should have given you, nor will it ever be discovered by any, for all think of me even as you did a while ago, or even more so. Reject not the grace that God accords you, for 'tis in your power to have, and, if you are wise and follow my advice, you shall have that which women not a few desire in vain to have. And moreover I have jewels fair and rare, which I am minded shall be yours and none others. Wherefore, sweet my hope, deny me not due guerdon of the service which I gladly render you." The lady, her eyes still downcast, knew not how to deny him, and yet scrupled to gratify him. Wherefore the abbot, seeing that she had hearkened and hesitated to answer, deemed that she was already half won, and following up what he had said with much more to the like effect, did not rest until he had persuaded her that she would do well to comply. And so with some confusion she told him that she was ready to obey his every behest, but it might not be until Furcando was in purgatory. The abbot, well content, replied, "And we will send him thither forthwith. Do but arrange that he come hither to stay with me tomorrow or the day after." Which said, he slipped a most beautiful ring on her finger, and dismissed her. Pleased with the gift, and expecting more to come, the lady rejoined her attendants, with whom she forthwith fell a talking marvelous things of the abbot's sanctity, and so went home with them. Some few days after, Furcando being come to the abbey, the abbot no sooner saw him than he resolved to send him to purgatory. So he selected from among his drugs a powder of marvelous virtue, which he had gotten in the Levant from a great prince, who averred that 'twas wont to be used by the old man of the mountain, when he would send any one to or bring him from his paradise, and that, without doing the recipient any harm, 'twould induce in him, according to the quantity of the dose, a sleep of such duration and quality that, while the efficacy of the powder lasted, none would deem him to be alive. Whereof he took enough to cause a 3-day sleep, and gave it to Furcando in his cell in a beaker that had still some wine in it, so that he drank it unwittingly, after which he took Furcando to the cloister, and there with some of his monks fell to making merry with him and his ineptitudes. In no long time, however, the powder so wrought, that Furcando was seized in the head with a fit of somnolence so sudden and violent that he slept as he stood, and sleeping fell to the ground. The abbot put on an agitated air, caused him to be undressed, sent for cold water, and had it sprinkled on his face, and applied such other remedies as if he would fain call back life and sense banished by vapors of the stomach, or some other intrusive force. But, as, for all that he and his monks did, Furcando did not revive, they, after feeling his pulse and finding there no sign of life, one and all pronounced him certainly dead. Wherefore they sent word to his wife and kinsfolk, who came forthwith, and mourned a while, after which Furcando in his clothes was by the abbot's order laid in a tomb. The lady went home, saying that nothing should ever part her from the little son that she had borne Furcando, and so she occupied herself with the care of her son and Furcando's estate. At night the abbot rose noiselessly, and with the help of a Bolognese monk, in whom he reposed much trust, and who was that very day arrived from Bologna, got Furcando out of the tomb, and bore him to a vault, which admitted no light, having been made to serve as a prison for delinquent monks. And having stripped him of his clothes, and habited him as a monk, they laid him on a truss of straw, and left him there until he should revive. Expecting which event, and instructed by the abbot how he was then to act, the Bolognese monk, none else knowing aught of what was afoot, kept watch by the tomb. The day after, the abbot with some of his monks paid a pastoral visit to the lady's house, where he found her in mourning weeds and sad at heart, and, after administering a little consolation, he gently asked her to redeem her promise. Free as she now felt herself, and hampered neither by Furcando nor by any other, the lady, who had noticed another beautiful ring on the abbot's finger, promised immediate compliance, and arranged with the abbot that he should visit her the very next night. So, at nightfall, the abbot donned Furcando's clothes, and, attended by his monk, paid his visit, and lay with her until maidens, to his immense delight and solace, and so returned to the abbey. And many visits he paid her on the same errand, whereby some that met him, coming or going that way, supposed that 'twas Furcando perambulating those parts by way of penance. And fables not a few passed from mouth to mouth of the foolish Rustus, and sometimes reached the ears of the lady, who was at no loss to account for them. As for Furcando, when he revived, 'twas only to find himself he knew not where, while the Bolognese monk entered the tomb, gibbering horribly, and armed with a rod, wherewith, having laid hold of Furcando, he gave him a severe thrashing. Blubbering and bellowing for pain, Furcando could only ejaculate, "Where am I?" "In purgatory," replied the monk. "How?" returned Furcando, "am I dead then?" And the monk assuring him that 'twas even so, he fell a bewailing his own and his lady's and his son's fate, after the most ridiculous fashion in the world. The monk brought him somewhat to eat and drink, of which when Furcando caught sight, "Oh," said he, "dead folk eat then, do they?" "They do," replied the monk, "and this, which I bring thee, is what the lady that was thy wife sent this morning to the church by way of alms for masses for thy soul, and God is minded that it be assigned to thee." "Now God grant her a happy year," said Furcando. "Dearly I loved her while I yet lived, and would hold her all night long in my arms, and cease not to kiss her, and would do yet more to her, when I was so minded." Whereupon he fell to eating and drinking with great avidity, and finding the wine not much to his taste, he said, "Now God do her a mischief. Why gave she not the priest of the wine that is in the cask by the wall?" When he had done eating, the monk laid hold of him again, and gave him another sound thrashing with the rod. Furcando bellowed mightily, and then cried out, "Alas! Why servest thou me so?" "God," answered the monk, "has decreed that thou be so served twice a day." "For why?" said Furcando. "Because," returned the monk, "thou wast jealous, notwithstanding thou hadst to wife a woman that has not her peer in thy countryside." "Alas," said Furcando, "she was indeed all that thou say'st, and the sweetest creature too, O comfit so honey, but I knew not that God took it amiss that a man should be jealous, or I had not been so." "Of that," replied the monk, "thou shouldst have bethought thee while thou wast there, and have amended thy ways, and should it fall to thy lot ever to return thither, be sure that thou so lay to heart the lesson that I now give thee, that thou be no more jealous." "Oh," said Furcando. Dead folks sometimes return to earth, do they? They do, replied the monk, if God so will. Oh, said Furcando, if I ever return, I will be the best husband in the world. Never will I beat her or scold her, save for the wine that she has sent me this morning, and also for sending me never a candle, so that I have had perforce to eat in the dark. Nay, said the monk, she sent them, but they were burned at the masses. Oh, said Furcando, I doubt not you say true, and, of a surety, if I ever return, I will let her do just as she likes. But tell me, who art thou that entreatest me thus? Late of Sardinia I, answered the monk, dead too, and, for that I gave my lord much countenance in his jealousy, doomed by God for my proper penance to entreat thee thus with food and drink and thrashings, until such time as he may ordain otherwise touching thee and me. And are we two the only folk here? Inquired Furcando. Nay, there are thousands beside, answered the monk, but thou canst neither see nor hear them, nor they thee. And how far, said Ferrando, may we be from our country? Oh, ho, returned the monk, why, 'tis some miles clean out of sheet range. As if, said Furcando, that is far indeed. Methinks we must be out of the world. In such a course, alternately beaten, fed and amused with idle tales, was Furcando kept for 10 months, while the abbot, to his great felicity, paid many a visit to the fair lady, and had the jolliest time in the world with her. But, as misfortunes will happen, the lady conceived, which fact, as soon as she was aware of it, she imparted to the abbot, whereupon both agreed that Furcando must without delay be brought back from purgatory to earth, and be given to understand that she was with child of him. So the very next night the abbot went to the prison, and in a disguised voice pronounced Furcando's name, and said to him, Furcando, be of good cheer, for God is minded that thou return to earth, and on thy return thou shalt have a son by thy lady, and thou shalt call him Benedetto, because 'tis in answer to the prayers of thy holy abbot, and thy lady, and for love of Saint Benedict, that God accords thee this grace. Whereat Furcando was overjoyed, and said, it likes me well. God give a good year to Master Lord God, and the abbot, and Saint Benedict, and my his powdered, honey sweet wife. Then, in the wine that he sent him, the abbot administered enough of the powder to cause him to sleep for 4 hours, and so, with the aid of the monk, having first habited him in his proper clothes, he privily conveyed him back to the tomb in which he had been buried. On the morrow at daybreak Furcando revived, and perceiving through a chink in the tomb a glimmer of light, to which he had been a stranger for full 10 months, he knew that he was alive, and began to bellow, let me out, let me out. Then, setting his head to the lid of the tomb, he heaved amain, whereby the lid, being insecure, started, and he was already thrusting it aside, when the monks, maidens being now ended, ran to the spot and recognized Furcando's voice, and saw him issue from the tomb, by which unwonted event they were all so affrighted that they took to flight, and hied them to the abbot, who, rising as if from prayer, said, Sons, be not afraid, take the cross and the holy water, and follow me, and let us see what sign of his might God will vouchsafe us. And so he led the way to the tomb, beside which they found Furcando, standing, deathly pale by reason of his long estrangement from the light. On sight of the abbot he ran and threw himself at his feet, saying, My father, it has been revealed to me that 'tis to your prayers and those of Saint Benedict and my lady that I owe my release from purgatorial pain, and restoration to life. Wherefore 'tis my prayer that God give you a good year and good allens, today and all days. Laud we the power of God, said the abbot. Go then, son, as God has restored thee to earth, comfort thy wife, who, since thou didst depart this life, has been ever in tears, and mayst thou live henceforth in the love and service of God. Sir, answered Furcando, 'tis well said, and, for the doing, trust me that, as soon as I find her, I shall kiss her, such is the love I bear her. So saying, he went his way, and the abbot, left alone with his monks, made as if he marvelled greatly at the affair, and caused devoutly chant the Miserere. So Furcando returned to his hamlet, where all that saw him fleeing, as folk were wont to flee from spectacles of horror, he called them back, asseverating that he was risen from the tomb. His wife at first was no less timorous, but, as folk began to take heart of grace, perceiving that he was alive, they plied him with many questions, all which he answered as one that had returned with ripe experience, and gave them tidings of the souls of their kinsfolk, and told of his own invention the prettiest fables of the purgatorial state, and in full folkmood recounted the revelation vouchsafed him by the mouth of Ragnolo Bragiolo before his resuscitation. Thus was Ferkondo reinstated in his property and reunited to his wife, who, being pregnant, as he thought, by himself, chanced by the time of her delivery to countenance the vulgar error that the woman must bear the infant in the womb for exactly 9 months, and gave birth to a male child, who was named Benedetto Ferkondi. Ferkondo's return from purgatory, and the report he brought thence, immeasurably enhanced the fame of the abbot's holiness. So Ferkondo, cured of his jealousy by the thrashings which he had gotten for it, verified the abbot's prediction, and never offended the lady again in that sort. Wherefore she lived with him, as before, in all outward seemliness, albeit she failed not, as occasion served, to foregather with the holy abbot, who had so well and sedulously served her in her especial need. Novel 9. Gillette of Narbonne cures the King of France of a fistula, craves for spouse Bertrand de Roussillon, who marries her against his will, and hies him in despite to Florence, where, as he courts a young woman, Gillette lies with him in her stead, and has 2 sons by him, for which cause he afterwards takes her into favor and entreats her as his wife. Laureta's story being ended, and the queen being minded not to break her engagement with Dionio, 'twas now her turn to speak. Wherefore, without awaiting the call of her subjects, thus with me most gracious she began: Now that we have heard Laureta's story, who shall tell any to compare with it for beauty? Lucky indeed was it that she was not the first, for few that followed would have pleased, and so, I misdoubt me, 'twill fare ill with those that remain to complete the day's narration. However, for what it may be worth, I will tell you a story which seems to me germane to our theme. Know, then, that in the realm of France there was a gentleman, Isnard, Comte de Roussillon, by name, who, being in ill health, kept ever in attendance on him a physician, one Master Gerard of Narbonne. The said Count had an only son named Bertrand, a very fine and winsome little lad, with whom were brought up other children of his own age, among them the said physician's little daughter Gillette, who with a love boundless and ardent out of all keeping with her tender years became enamoured of this Bertrand. And so, when the Count died, and his son, being left a ward of the king, must needs go to Paris, the girl remained beside herself with grief, and, her father dying soon after, would gladly have gone to Paris to see Bertrand, might she but have found a fair excuse, but no decent pretext could she come by, being left a great and sole heiress and very closely guarded. So being come of marriageable age, still cherishing Bertrand's memory, she rejected not a few suitors, to whom her kinsfolk would fain have married her, without assigning any reason. Now her passion waxing ever more ardent for Bertrand, as she learned that he was grown a most goodly gallant, tidings reached her that the King of France, in consequence of a tumour which he had had in the breast, and which had been ill tended, was now troubled with a fistula, which occasioned him extreme distress and suffering, nor had he as yet come by a physician that was able, though many had essayed, to cure him, but had rather grown worse under their hands, wherefore in despair he was minded no more to have recourse to any for counsel or aid. Whereat the damsel was overjoyed, deeming not only that she might find therein lawful occasion to go to Paris, but, that, if the disease was what she took it to be, it might well betide that she should be wedded to Bertrand. So for not a little knowledge had she gotten from her father, she prepared a powder from certain herbs serviceable in the treatment of the supposed disease, and straightway took horse, and hied her to Paris. Arrived there she made it her first concern to have sight of Bertrand, and then, having obtained access to the king, she besought him of his grace to shew her his disease. The king knew not how to refuse so young, fair and winsome a damsel, and let her see the place. Whereupon, no longer doubting that she should cure him, she said, Sire, so please you, I hope in God to cure you of this malady within 8 days without causing you the least distress or discomfort." The king inly scoffed at her words, saying to himself, "How should a damsel have come by a knowledge and skill that the greatest physicians in the world do not possess?" He therefore graciously acknowledged her good intention, and answered that he had resolved no more to follow advice of physician. "Sire," said the damsel, "you disdain my art, because I am young and a woman, but I bid you bear in mind that I rely not on my own skill, but on the help of God, and the skill of Master Gerard of Narbonne, my father, and a famous physician in his day." Whereupon the king said to himself, "Perchance she is sent me by God, why put I not her skill to the proof, seeing that she says that she can cure me in a short time, and cause me no distress?" And being minded to make the experiment, he said, "Damsel, and if, having caused me to cancel my resolve, you should fail to cure me, what are you content should ensue?" "Sire," answered the damsel, "set a guard upon me, and if within 8 days I cure you not, have me burned, but if I cure you, what shall be my guerdon?" "You seem," said the king, "to be yet unmarried. If you shall effect the cure, we will marry you well and in high place." "Sire," returned the damsel, "well content indeed am I that you should marry me, so it be to such a husband as I shall ask of you, save that I may not ask any of your sons or any other member of the royal house." Whereto the king forthwith consented, and the damsel, thereupon applying her treatment, restored him to health before the period assigned. Wherefore, as soon as the king knew that he was cured, "Damsel," said he, "well have you won your husband?" She answered, "In that case, sire, I have won Bertrand de Roussillon, of whom, while yet a child, I was enamored, and whom I have ever since most ardently loved." To give her Bertrand seemed to the king no small matter, but, having pledged his word, he would not break it. So he sent for Bertrand, and said to him, "Bertrand, you are now come to man's estate, and fully equipped to enter on it. 'Tis therefore our will that you go back and assume the governance of your county, and that you take with you a damsel, whom we have given you to wife." "And who is the damsel, sire?" said Bertrand. "She it is," answered the king, "that has restored us to health by her physi." Now Bertrand, knowing Gillette, and that her lineage was not such as matched his nobility, albeit, seeing her, he had found her very fair, was overcome with disdain, and answered, "So, sire, you would fain give me a she-daughter to wife. Now God forbid that I should ever marry any such woman." "Then," said the king, "you would have us fail of the faith which we pledged to the damsel, who asked you in marriage by way of guerdon for our restoration to health." "Sire," said Bertrand, "you may take from me all that I possess, and give me as your man to whomsoever you may be minded, but rest assured that I shall never be satisfied with such a match." "Nay, but you will," replied the king, "for the damsel is fair and discreet, and loves you well, wherefore we anticipate that you will live far more happily with her than with a dame of much higher lineage." Bertrand was silent, and the king made great preparations for the celebration of the nuptials. The appointed day came, and Bertrand, albeit reluctantly, nevertheless complied, and in the presence of the king was wedded to the damsel, who loved him more dearly than herself. Which done, Bertrand, who had already taken his resolution, said that he was minded to go down to his county, there to consummate the marriage, and so, having craved and had leave of absence of the king, he took horse, but instead of returning to his county he hied him to Tuscany, where, finding the Florentines at war with the Sisenses, he determined to take service with the Florentines, and being made heartily and honorably welcome, was appointed to the command of part of their forces, at a liberal stipend, and so remained in their service for a long while. Distressed by this turn of fortune, and hoping by her wise management to bring Bertrand back to his county, the bride tied her to Roussillon, where she was received by all the tenants as their liege lady. She found that, during the long absence of the lord, everything had fallen into decay and disorder, which, being a capable woman, she rectified with great and sedulous care, to the great joy of the tenants, who held her in great esteem and love, and severely censured the count, that he was not satisfied with her. When the lady had duly ordered all things in the county, she dispatched 2 knights to the Count with the intelligence, praying him, that, if 'twas on her account that he came not home, he would so inform her, in which case she would gratify him by departing. To whom with all harshness he replied, she may even please herself in the matter. For my part I will go home and live with her, when she has this ring on her finger and a son gotten of me upon her arm. The ring was one which he greatly prized, and never removed from his finger, by reason of a virtue which he had been given to understand that it possessed. The knights appreciated the harshness of a condition which contained 2 articles, both of which were all but impossible, and, seeing that by no words of theirs could they alter his resolve, they returned to the lady, and delivered his message. Sorely distressed, the lady after long pondering determined to try how and where the 2 conditions might be satisfied, that so her husband might be hers again. Having formed her plan, she assembled certain of the more considerable and notable men of the county, to whom she gave a consecutive and most touching narrative of all that she had done for love of the Count, with the result concluding by saying that she was not minded to tarry there to the Count's perpetual exile, but to pass the rest of her days in pilgrimages and pious works for the good of her soul, wherefore she prayed them to undertake the defense and governance of the county, and to inform the Count that she had made entire and absolute cession of it to him, and was gone away with the intention of never more returning to Rassilon. As she spoke, tears not a few coursed down the cheeks of the honest men, and again they besought her to change her mind, and stay. All in vain, however she commended them to God, and, accompanied only by one of her male cousins and a chambermaid, all 3 habited as pilgrims and amply provided with money and precious jewels, she took the road, nor tarried until she was arrived at Florence. There she lodged in a little inn kept by a good woman that was a widow, bearing herself lowly as a poor pilgrim, and eagerly expectant of news of her lord. Now it so befell that the very next day she saw Bertrand pass in front of the inn on horseback at the head of his company, and though she knew him very well, nevertheless she asked the good woman of the inn who he was. The hostess replied, "'Tis a foreign gentleman, Count Bertrand. They call him a very pleasant gentleman, and courteous, and much beloved in this city, and he is in the last degree enamored of one of our neighbors here, who is a gentlewoman, but in poor circumstances. A very virtuous damsel she is too, and, being as yet unmarried by reason of her poverty, she lives with her mother, who is an excellent and most discreet lady, but for whom, perchance, she would before now have yielded and gratified the Count's desire." No word of this was lost on the lady. She pondered and meditated every detail with the closest attention, and having laid it all to heart, took her resolution. She ascertained the names and abode of the lady and her daughter that the Count loved, and hied her one day privily, wearing her pilgrim's weeds, to their house, where she found the lady and her daughter in very evident poverty, and after greeting them, told the lady that, if it were agreeable to her, she would speak with her. The gentlewoman rose and signified her willingness to listen to what she had to say, so they went into a room by themselves and sate down. And then the Countess began thus: "Madam, methinks you are, as I am, under fortune's frown, but perchance you have it in your power, if you are so minded, to afford solace to both of us." The lady answered that, so she might honorably find it, solace indeed was what she craved most of all things in the world. Whereupon the Countess continued, "I must first be assured of your faith, wherein if I confide and am deceived, the interests of both of us will suffer." "Have no fear," said the gentlewoman, "speak your whole mind without reserve, for you will find that there is no deceit in me." So the Countess told who she was, and the whole course of her love affair, from its commencement to that hour, on such wise that the gentlewoman, believing her story the more readily that she had already heard it in part from others, was touched with compassion for her. The narrative of her woes complete, the Countess added, "Now that you have heard my misfortunes, you know the 2 conditions that I must fulfill, if I would come by my husband, nor know I any other person than you, that may enable me to fulfill them. But so you may, if this which I hear is true, to wit, that my husband is in the last degree enamored of your daughter." Madam, replied the gentlewoman, I know not if the Count loves my daughter, but true it is that he makes great shew of loving her. But how may this enable me to do aught for you in the matter that you have at heart? The how, madam, returned the Countess, I will shortly explain to you, but you shall first hear what I intend shall ensue, if you serve me. Your daughter, I see, is fair and of marriageable age, and, by what I have learned and may well understand, 'tis because you have not the wherewith to marry her that you keep her at home. Now, in recompense of the service that you shall do me, I mean to provide her forthwith from my own moneys with such a dowry as you yourself shall deem adequate for her marriage. The lady was too needy not to be gratified by the proposal, but, nevertheless, with the true spirit of the gentlewoman, she answered, Nay, but, madam, tell me that which I may do for you, and if it shall be such as I may honorably do, gladly will I do it, and then you shall do as you may be minded. Said then the Countess, I require of you, that through someone in whom you trust you send word to the Count, my husband, that your daughter is ready to yield herself entirely to his will, so she may be sure that he loves her even as he professes, whereof she will never be convinced, until he send her the ring which he wears on his finger, and which, she understands, he prizes so much, which, being sent, you shall give to me, and shall then send him word that your daughter is ready to do his pleasure, and, having brought him hither secretly, you shall contrive that I lie by his side instead of your daughter. Perchance, by God's grace I shall conceive, and so, having his ring on my finger, and a son gotten of him on my arm, shall have him for my own again, and live with him even as a wife should live with her husband, and owe it all to you. The lady felt that 'twas not a little that the Countess craved of her, for she feared lest it should bring reproach upon her daughter, but she reflected that to aid the good lady to recover her husband was an honorable enterprise, and that in undertaking it she would be subserving the like end, and so, trusting in the good and virtuous disposition of the Countess, she not only promised to do as she was required, but in no long time, proceeding with caution and secrecy, as she had been bidden, she both had the ring from the Count, loath though he was to part with it, and unningly contrived that the Countess should lie with him in place of her daughter. In which first commingling, so ardently sought by the Count, it so pleased God that the lady was gotten, as in due time her delivery made manifest, with 2 sons. Nor once only, but many times did the lady gratify the Countess with the embraces of her husband, using such secrecy that no word thereof ever got wind, the Count all the while supposing that he lay, not with his wife, but with her that he loved, and being wont to give her, as he left her in the morning, some fair and rare jewel, which she jealously guarded. When she perceived that she was with child, the Countess, being minded no more to burden the lady with such service, said to her, Madam, thanks be to God and to you, I now have that which I desired, and therefore 'tis time that I make you grateful requital, and take my leave of you. The lady answered that she was glad if the Countess had gotten aught that gave her joy, but that 'twas not as hoping to have guerdon thereof that she had done her part, but simply because she deemed it meet and her duty so to do. Well said, madam, returned the Countess, and in like manner that which you shall ask of me I shall not give you by way of guerdon, but because I deem it meet and my duty to give it. Whereupon the lady, yielding to necessity, and abashed beyond measure, asked of her £100 wherewith to marry her daughter. The Countess, marking her embarrassment, and the modesty of her request, gave her £500 besides jewels fair and rare, worth, perhaps, no less, and having thus much more than contented her, and received her superabundant thanks, she took leave of her and returned to the inn. The lady, to render purposeless further visits or messages on Bertrand's part, withdrew with her daughter to the house of her kinsfolk in the country, nor was it long before Bertrand, on the urgent entreaty of his vassals and intelligence of the departure of his wife, quitted Florence and returned home. Greatly elated by this intelligence, the Countess tarried a while in Florence, and was there delivered of 2 sons as like as possible to their father, whom she nurtured with sedulous care. But by and by she saw fit to take the road, and being come, unrecognized by any, to Montpellier, rested there a few days, and being on the alert for news of the Count and where he was, she learned that on All Saints' Day he was to hold a great reception of ladies and gentlemen at Rosslyn, whither, retaining her now wonted pilgrim's weeds, she haid her, and finding that the ladies and gentlemen were all gathered in the Count's palace and on the point of going to table, she tarried not to change her dress, but went up into the hall, bearing her little ones in her arms, and threading her way through the throng to the place where she saw the Count stand, she threw herself at his feet, and sobbing, said to him, "My lord, thy hapless bride am I, who to ensure thy homecoming and abidance in peace have long time been a wanderer, and now demand of the observance of the condition whereof word was brought me by the 2 knights whom I sent to thee. Lo, in my arms not one son only but twain, gotten of thee, and on my finger thy ring. 'Tis time, then, that I be received of thee as thy wife according to thy word." Whereat the Count was all dumbfounded, recognizing the ring and his own lineaments in the children, so like were they to him, but saying to himself nevertheless, "How can it have come about?" So the Countess, while the Count and all that were present marvelled exceedingly, told what had happened, and the manner of it, in precise detail. Wherefore the Count, perceiving that she spoke truth, and having regard to her perseverance and address and her 2 fine boys, and the wishes of all his vassals and the ladies, who with one accord besought him to own and honor her thenceforth as his lawful bride, laid aside his harsh comdere, and raised the Countess to her feet, and embraced and kissed her, and acknowledged her for his lawful wife, and the children for his own. Then, having caused her to be rearrayed in garments befitting her rank, he, to the boundless delight of as many as were there, and of all other his vassals, gave up that day and some that followed to feasting and merrymaking, and did ever thenceforth honor, love, and most tenderly cherish her as his bride and wife. Novel 10. Alibech turns hermit, and is taught by Rustio, a monk, how the devil is put in hell. She is afterwards conveyed thence, and becomes the wife of Nearbail. Dionel, observing that the queen's story, which he had followed with the closest attention, was now ended, and that it only remained for him to speak, waited not to be bidden, but smilingly thus began, "Gracious ladies, perchance you have not yet heard how the devil is put in hell, wherefore, without deviating far from the topic of which you have discoursed throughout the day, I will tell you how 'tis done. It may be the lesson will prove inspiring, besides which, you may learn therefrom that, albeit love prefers the gay palace and the dainty chamber to the rude cabin, yet, for all that, he may at times manifest his might in wilds matted with forests, rugged with Alps, and desolate with caverns, whereby it may be understood that all things are subject to his sway. But to come to my story, I say that in the city of Capsa in Barbary there was once a very rich man, who with other children had a fair and dainty little daughter, Alibech by name. Now Alibech, not being a Christian, and hearing many Christians, that were in the city, speak much in praise of the Christian faith and the service of God, did one day inquire of one of them after what fashion it were possible to serve God with as few impediments as might be, and was informed that they served God best who most completely renounced the world and its affairs like those who had fixed their abode in the wilds of the Thebaid desert. Whereupon, actuated by no sober predilection, but by childish impulse, the girl, who was very simple and about 14 years of age, said never a word more of the matter, but stole away on the morrow, and quite alone set out to walk to the Thebaid desert, and, by force of resolution, albeit with no small suffering, she after some days reached those wilds where, espying a cabin a great way off, she hied her thither, and found a holy man by the door, who, marveling to see her there, asked her what she came there to seek. She answered that, guided by the Spirit of God, she was come thither, seeking, if haply she might serve him, and also find someone that might teach her how he ought to be served. Marking her youth and great beauty, the worthy man, fearing lest, if he suffered her to remain with him, he should be ensnared by the devil, commended her good intention, set before her a frugal repast of roots of herbs, rab apples and dates, with a little water to wash them down, and said to her, "My daughter, there is a holy man not far from here, who is much better able to teach thee that of which thou art in quest than I am. Go to him, therefore. And he shewed her the way. But when she was come whither she was directed, she met with the same answer as before, and so, setting forth again, she came at length to the cell of a young hermit, a worthy man and very devout, his name Rastio, whom she interrogated as she had the others. Rastio, being minded to make severe trial of his constancy, did not send her away, as the others had done, but kept her with him in his cell, and when night came, made her a little bed of palm leaves whereon he bade her compose herself to sleep. Hardly had she done so before the solicitations of the flesh joined battle with the powers of Rastio's spirit, and he, finding himself left in the lurch by the latter, endured not many assaults before he beat a retreat, and surrendered at discretion, wherefore he bade adieu to holy meditation and prayer and discipline, and fell a musing on the youth and beauty of his companion, and also how he might so order his conversation with her, that without seeming to her to be a libertine he might yet compass that which he craved of her. So, probing her by certain questions, he discovered that she was as yet entirely without cognizance of man, and as simple as she seemed, wherefore he exegetated a plan for bringing her to pleasure him under color of serving God. He began by giving her a long lecture on the great enmity that subsists between God and the devil, after which he gave her to understand that, God having condemned the devil to hell, to put him there was of all services the most acceptable to God. The girl asking him how it might be done, Rastio answered, Thou shalt know it in a trice, thou hast but to do that which thou seest me do. Then, having divested himself of his scanty clothing, he threw himself stark naked on his knees, as if he would pray, whereby he caused the girl, who followed his example, to confront him in the same posture. Whereupon Rastio, seeing her so fair, felt an accession of desire, and therewith came an insurgence of the flesh, which Alibet, marking with surprise, said, Rastio, what is this, which I see thee have, that so protrudes, and which I have not? Oh, my daughter, said Rastio, 'tis the devil of whom I have told thee. And seest thou? He is now tormenting me most grievously, insomuch that I am scarce able to hold out. Fain, praise be to God, said the girl, I see that I am in better case than thou, for no such devil have I. Sooth sayst thou, returned Rastio, but instead of him thou hast somewhat else that I have not. Oh, said Azabeth, what may that be? How, answered Rastio, and I tell thee, that 'tis my belief that God has sent thee hither for the salvation of my soul, seeing that, if this devil shall continue to plague me thus, then, so thou wilt have compassion on me and permit me to put him in hell, thou wilt both afford me great and exceeding great solace, and render to God an exceeding most acceptable service, if, as thou sayst, thou art come into these parts for such a purpose. In good faith the girl made answer, As I have hell to match your devil, be it, my father, as and when you will. Whereupon, Bless thee, my daughter, said Rastio, go we then, and put him there, that he leave me henceforth in peace. Which said, he took the girl to one of the beds and taught her the posture in which she must lie in order to incarcerate the spirit accursed of God. The girl, having never before put any devil in hell, felt on this first occasion a twinge of pain, wherefore she said to Rastio, Of a surety, my father, he must be a wicked fellow, this devil, and in very truth a foe to God, for there is sorrow even in hell, not to speak of other place when he is put there. Daughter, said Rastio, 'twill not be always so. And for better assurance thereof they put him there 6 times before they quitted the bed, whereby they so thoroughly abased his pride that he was fain to be quiet. However, the proud fit returning upon him from time to time, and the girl addressing herself always obediently to its reduction, it so befell that she began to find the game agreeable, and would say to Rastio, Now see I plainly that 'twas true, what the worthy man said at Habsa, of the service of God being so delightful. Indeed I cannot remember that in aught that ever I did I had so much pleasure, so much solace, as in putting the devil in hell, for which cause I deem it insensate folly on the part of any one to have a care to aught else than the service of God. Wherefore many a time she would come to Rastio, and say to him, My father, 'twas to serve God that I came hither, and not to pass my days in idleness. Go we then and put the devil in hell. And while they did so, she would now and again say, I know not, Rostyo, why the devil should escape from hell were he but as ready to stay there as hell is to receive and retain him, he would never come out of it. So, the girl thus frequently inviting and exhorting Rostyo to the service of God, there came at length a time when she had so thoroughly lightened his doublet that he shivered when another would have sweated, wherefore he began to instruct her that the devil was not to be corrected and put in hell, save when his head was exalted with pride, adding, and we by God's grace have brought him to so sober a mind that he prays God he may be left in peace, by which means he for a time kept the girl quiet. But when she saw that Rostyo had no more occasion for her to put the devil in hell, she said to him one day, Rostyo, if thy devil is chastened and gives thee no more trouble, my hell, on the other hand, gives me no peace, wherefore I with my hell have holpen thee to abase the pride of thy devil, so thou wouldst do well to lend me the aid of thy devil to allay the fervent heat of my hell. Rostyo, whose diet was roots of herbs and water, was scarce able to respond to her demands. He told her that 'twould require not a few devils to allay the heat of hell, but that he would do what might be in his power, and so now and again he satisfied her, but so seldom that 'twas as if he had tossed a bean into the jaws of a lion. Whereat the girl, being fain of more of the service of God than she had, did somewhat repine. However, the case standing thus, deficiency of power against superfluity of desire between Rostyo's devil and Kalibek's hell, it chanced that a fire broke out in Kapsa, whereby the house of Kalibek's father was burned, and he and all his sons and the rest of his household perished, so that Kalibek was left sole heiress of all his estate. And a young gallant, Nirbaal by name, who by reckless munificence had wasted all his substance, having discovered that she was alive, addressed himself to the pursuit of her, and, having found her in time to prevent the confiscation of her father's estate as an escheat for failure of heirs, took her, much to Rostyo's relief and against her own will, back to Kapsa, and made her his wife, and shared with her her vast patrimony. But before he had lain with her, she was questioned by the ladies of the manner in which she had served God in the desert, whereto she answered, that she had been wont to serve him by putting the devil in hell, and that Nirbaal had committed a great sin when he took her out of such service. The ladies being curious to know how the devil was put in hell, the girl satisfied them, partly by words, partly by signs, whereat they laughed exorbitantly and still laugh, and said to her, Be not downhearted, daughter, 'tis done here too. Nirbaal will know well how to serve God with you in that way. And so the story passing from mouth to mouth throughout the city, it came at last to be a common proverb, that the most acceptable service that can be rendered to God is to put the devil in hell, which proverb, having traveled hither across the sea, is still current. Wherefore, young ladies, you that have need of the grace of God, see to it that you learn how to put the devil in hell, because 'tis mightily pleasing to God, and of great solace to both the parties, and much good may thereby be engendered and ensue. 1,000 times or more had Diakonos' story brought the laugh to the lips of the honorable ladies, so quaint and curiously entertaining found they the fashion of it. And now at its close the queen, seeing the term of her sovereignty come, took the laurel wreath from her head, and with mien most debonair, set it on the brow of Philostrato, saying, We shall soon see whether the wolf will know better how to guide the sheep than the sheep have yet succeeded in guiding the wolves. Whereat Philostrato said with a laugh, Had I been hearkened to, the wolves would have taught the sheep to put the devil in hell, even as Rostyo taught Kalibek. Wherefore call us not wolves, seeing that you have not shewn yourselves sheep. However, as best I may be able, I will govern the kingdom committed to my charge. Whereupon Nephile took him up. Hark ye, Philostrato, she said, while you thought to teach us, you might have learned a lesson from us, as did Macedo di Lamportio from the nuns, and have recovered your speech when the bones had learned to whistle without a master. Philostrato, perceiving that there was a scythe for each of his arrows, gave up jesting, and addressed himself to the governance of his kingdom. He called the seneschal, and held him strictly to account in every particular. He then judiciously ordered all matters as he deemed would be best and most to the satisfaction of the company, while his sovereignty should last. And having so done, he turned to the ladies, and said, "Loving ladies, as my ill luck would have it, since I have had wit to tell good from evil, the charms of one or other of you have kept me ever a slave to love, and for all I shewed myself humble and obedient and conformable, so far as I knew how, to all his ways, my fate has been still the same, to be discarded for another, and go ever from bad to worse, and so, I suppose, 'twill be with me to the hour of my death. Wherefore I am minded that tomorrow our discourse be of no other topic than that which is most germane to my condition, to wit, of those whose loves had a disastrous close, because mine, I expect, will in the long run be most disastrous. Nor for other cause was the name, by which you address me, given me by one that well knew its signification." Which said, he arose, and dismissed them all until supper time. So fair and delightsome was the garden that none saw fit to quit it, and seek diversion elsewhere. Rather, for the sun now shone with a tempered radiance that caused no discomfort. Some of the ladies gave chase to the kids and conses and other creatures that haunted it, and, scampering to and fro among them as they sate, had caused them 100 times, or so, some slight embarrassment. Deonio and Fecametta fell a singing of Messer Guglielmo and the Lady of Virtue. Philomena and Pamphilo sat them down to a game of chess, and, as thus they pursued each their several diversions, time sped so swiftly that the supper horse stole upon them almost unawares, whereupon they ranged the tables round the beautiful fountain, and supped with all glad and festal cheer. When the tables were removed, Philostrato, being minded to follow in the footsteps of his fair predecessors in sway, bade Loretta lead a dance and sing a song. She answered, "My lord, songs of others know I none, nor does my memory furnish me with any of mine own that seems meet for so gay a company, but, if you will be content with what I have, gladly will I give you thereof." "Naught of thine," returned the king, "could be other than goodly and delectable. Wherefore give us even what thou hast." So encouraged, Loretta, with dulcet voice, but manner somewhat languishing, raised the ensuing strain, to which the other ladies responded, "What dame disconsolate may so lament as I, that vainly sigh, to love still dedicate? He that the heaven and every orb doth move formed me for his delight fair, debonair and gracious, apt for love, that here on earth each soaring spirit might have foretaste how, above, that beauty shews that standeth in his sight. Ah, but dull wit and slight, for that it judgeth ill, licketh me not, nay, doth me vilely rate. There was who loved me, and my maiden grace did fondly clip and strain, as in his arms, so in his soul's embrace, and from mine eyes love's fire did drink amain, and time that glides apace in naught but courting me to spend was fain, whom courteous I did deign heaven as my peer to entreat, but am of him bereft. Ah, dolorous fate! Came to me next a gallant swollen with pride, brave, in his own conceit, and no less noble eke, whom will betide that he me took, and holds in all unmeet suspicion, jealous eyed. And I, who wot that me the world should greet as the predestined sweet of many men, well nigh despair, to be to one thus subjugate. Ah, woe is me! Cursed be the luckless day, when, a new gown to wear, I said the fatal A for blithe and gay. In that plain gown I lived, no whit less fair, while in this rich array a sad and far less honored life I bear. Would I had died, or ere sounded those notes of joy. Ah, dolorous cheer! My woe to celebrate, so list my supplication, lover dear, of whom such joyance I, as ne'er another, had. Thou that in clear light of the Maker's presence art, deny not pity to thy fear, who thee may ne'er forget, but let once I breathe tidings that on high thou burnest still for me, and sue of God that he me there translate. So ended Loretta her song, to which all hearkened attentively, though not all interpreted it alike. Some were inclined to give it a moral after the Millancy's fashion, to wit, that a good porker was better than a pretty queen. Others construed it in a higher, better and truer sense, which 'tis not to the present purpose to unfold. Some more songs followed by command of the king, who caused torches not a few to be lighted and ranged about the flowery mead, and so the night was prolonged until the last star that had risen had begun to set. Then, bethinking him that 'twas time for slumber, the king bade all good night, and dismissed them to their several chambers. And doth here the third day of the Demeron, beginneth the fourth, in which, under the rule of Philostrato, discourse is had of those whose loves had a disastrous close. Dearest ladies, as well from what I heard in converse with the wise, as from matters that not seldom fell within my own observation and reading, I formed the opinion that the vehement and scorching blast of envy was apt to vent itself only upon lofty towers or the highest tree-tops, but therein I find that I misjudged, for, whereas I ever sought and studied how best to elude the buffetings of that furious hurricanes, and to that end kept a course not merely on the plain, but, by preference, in the depth of the valley, as should be abundantly clear to whoso looks at these little stories, written as they are not only in the vulgar Florentine, and in prose, and without dilatory flourish, but also in as homely and simple a style as may be. Nevertheless all this has not stood me in such stead but that I have been shrewdly shaken, nay, all but uprooted by the blast, and altogether clarated by the bite of this same envy. Whereby I may very well understand that 'tis true, what the sages aver, that only misery is exempt from envy in the present life. Know then, discreet my ladies, that some there are, who, reading these little stories, have alleged that I am too fond of you, and that 'tis not a seemly thing that I should take so much pleasure in ministering to your gratification and solace, and some have found more fault with me for praising you as I do. Others, affecting to deliver a more considered judgment, have said that it ill befits my time of life to ensue such matters, to wit, the discoursing of women, or endeavoring to pleasure them. And not a few, fainting a mighty tender regard to my fame, aver that I should do more wisely to keep ever with the Muses on Parnassus, than to foregather with you in such vain dalliance. Those again there are, who, divining less wisdom than despite, have told me that I should shew sounder sense if I bethought me how to get my daily bread, than, going after these idle toys, to nourish myself upon the wind, while certain others, in disparagement of my work, strive might and main to make it appear that the matters which I relate fell out otherwise than as I set them forth. Such then, noble ladies, or the blasts, such the sharp and cruel things, by which, while I champion your cause, I am assailed, harassed, and well nigh pierced through and through. Which ensures I hear and mark, God knows, with equal mind, and, though to you belongs all my defense, yet I mean not to be niggard of my own powers, but rather, without dealing out to them the castigation they deserve, to give them such slight answer as may secure my ears some respite of their clamor, and that without delay, seeing that, if already, though I have not completed the third part of my work, they are not a few and very presumptuous, I deem it possible, that before I have reached the end, should they receive no check, they may have grown so numerous, that 'twould scarce tax their powers to sink me, and that your forces, great though they be, would not suffice to withstand them. However, I am minded to answer none of them, until I have related in my behoof, not indeed an entire story, for I would not seem to foist my stories in among those of so honorable a company as that with which I have made you acquainted, but a part of one, that its very incompleteness may shew that it is not one of them. Wherefore, addressing my assailants, I say that in our city there was in old time a citizen named Filippo Balducci, a man of quite low origin, but of good substance, and well versed and expert in matters belonging to his condition, who had a wife that he most dearly loved, as did she him, so that their life passed in peace and concord, nor there was aught they studied so much as how to please each other perfectly. Now it came to pass, as it does to every one, that the good lady departed this life, leaving Filippo naught of hers but an only son, that she had had by him, and who was then about 2 years old. His wife's death left Filippo as disconsolate as ever was any man for the loss of a loved one, and sorely missing the companionship that was most dear to him, he resolved to have done with the world, and devote himself and his little son to the service of God. Wherefore, having dedicated all his goods to charitable uses, he forthwith betook him to the summit of Monte Hasanao, where he installed himself with his son in a little cell, and living on alms, passed his days in fasting and prayer, being careful above all things to say nothing to the boy of any temporal matters, nor to let him see aught of the kind, lest they should distract his mind from his religious exercises, but discoursing with him continually of the glory of the life eternal and of God and the saints, and teaching him naught else but holy orisons, in which way of life he kept him not a few years, never suffering him to quit the cell or see aught but himself. From time to time the worthy man would go Florence, where divers of the faithful would afford him relief according to his needs, and so he would return to his cell. And thus it fell out that one day Filippo, now an aged man, being asked by the boy, who was about 18 years old, whither he went, told him. Whereupon, "Father," said the boy, "you are now old, and scarce able to support fatigue. Why take you me not with you for once to Florence, and give me to know devout friends of God and you, so that I, who am young and fitter for such exertion than you, may thereafter go to Florence for our supplies at your pleasure, and you remain here?" The worthy man, bethinking him that his son was now grown up, and so habituated to the service of God as hardly to be seduced by the things of the world, said to himself, "He says well." And so, as he must needs go to Florence, he took the boy with him, where, seeing the palaces, the houses, the churches, and all matters else with which the city abounds, and of which he had no more recollection than if he had never seen them, the boy found all passing strange, and questioned his father of not a few of them, what they were and how they were named. His curiosity being no sooner satisfied in one particular than he plied his father with a further question. And so it befell that, while son and father were thus occupied in asking and answering questions, they encountered a bevy of damsels, fair and richly arrayed, being on their return from a wedding, whom the young man no sooner saw, than he asked his father what they might be. "My son," answered the father, "fix thy gaze on the ground, regard them not at all, for naughty things are they." "Oh," said the son, "and what is their name?" The father, fearing to awaken some mischievous craving of concupiscence in the young man, would not denote them truly, to wit, as women, but said, "They are called goslings." Whereupon, wonderful to tell, the lad, who had never before set eyes on any woman, thought no more of the palaces, the oxen, the horses, the asses, the money, or aught else that he had seen, but exclaimed, "Prithee, father, let me have one of those goslings." "Alas, my son," replied the father, "speak not of them, they are naughty things." "Oh," questioned the son, "but are naughty things made like that?" "Ay," returned the father. Whereupon the son, "I know not," he said, "what you say, nor why they should be naughty things. For my part, I have as yet seen naught that seemed to me so fair and delectable. They are fairer than the painted angels that you have so often shewn me." "Oh, if you love me, do but let us take one of these goslings up there, and I will see that she have whereon to bill." "Nay," said the father, "that will not I. Thou knowest not whereon they bill." And straightway, being where that nature was more potent than his art, he repented him that he had brought the boy to Florence. But enough of this story. 'Tis time for me to cut it short, and return to those, for whose instruction 'tis told. They say then, some of these my censors, that I am too fond of you, young ladies, and am at too great pains to pleasure you. Now that I am fond of you, and am at pains to pleasure you, I do most frankly and fully confess, and I ask them whether, considering only all that it means to have had, and to have continually, before one's eyes your debonair demeanor, your bewitching beauty and exquisite grace, and therewithal your modest womanliness, not to speak of having known the amorous kisses, the caressing embraces, the voluptuous comminglings, whereof our intercourse with you, ladies most sweet, not seldom is productive, they do verily marvel that I am fond of you, seeing that one who was nurtured, reared, and brought up on a savage and solitary mountain, within the narrow circuit of a cell, without other companion than his father, had no sooner seen you than 'twas you alone that he desired, that he demanded, that he sought with ardor. Will they tear, will they lacerate me with their henchers, if I, whose body heaven fashioned all apt for love, whose soul from very boyhood was dedicated to you, and not insensible to the power of the light of your eyes, to the sweetness of your honeyed words, to the flame that is kindled by your gentle sighs, but am fond of you and sedulous to pleasure you, again I bid them remember, in whom a hermit, a rude, witless lad, liker to an animal than to a human being, found more to delight him than in aught else that he saw. Of a truth whoso taxes me thus must be one that, feeling, knowing naught of the pleasure and power of natural affection, loves you not, nor craves your love, and such an one I hold in light esteem. And as for those that go about to find ground of exception in my age, they do but shew that they ill understand that the leek, albeit its head is white, has a green tail. But jesting apart, thus I answer them, that never to the end of my life shall I deem it shameful to me to pleasure those to whom Guido Cavalcanti and Dante Caligari in their old age, and Messer Cino di Pistoia in extreme old age, accounted it an honor and found it a delight to minister gratification. And but that 'twere a deviation from the use and wont of discourse, I would call history to my aid, and shew it to abound with stories of noble men of old time, who in their ripest age studied above all things else to pleasure the ladies, whereof if they be ignorant, go they and get them to school. To keep with the Muses on Parnassus is counsel I approve, but tarry with them always we cannot, nor they with us, nor is a man blameworthy, if, when he happen to part from them, he find his delight in those that resemble them. The Muses are ladies, and albeit ladies are not the peers of the Muses, yet they have their outward semblance, for which cause, if for no other, 'tis reasonable that I should be fond of them. Besides which, ladies have been to me the occasion of composing some 1,000 verses, but of never a verse that I made were the Muses the occasion. Howbeit 'twas with their aid, 'twas under their influence that I composed those 1,000 verses, and perchance they have sometimes visited me to encourage me in my present task, humble indeed though it be, doing honor and paying, as it were, tribute, to the likeness which the ladies have to them. Wherefore, while I weave these stories, I stray not so far from Mount Parnassus and the Muses as not a few perchance suppose. But what shall we say to those, in whom my hunger excites such commiseration that they bid me get me bread? Verily I know not, save this: suppose that in my need I were to beg bread of them, what would be their answer? I doubt not they would say, go seek it among the fables. And in sooth the poets have found more bread among their fables than many rich men among their treasures. And many that have gone after fables have crowned their days with splendor, while, on the other hand, not a few, in the endeavor to get them more bread than they needed, have perished miserably. But why waste more words on them? Let them send me packing, when I ask bread of them. Not that, thank God, I have yet need of it, and should I ever come to be in need of it, I know, like the apostle, how to abound and to be in want, and so am minded to be beholden to none but myself. As for those who say that these matters fell out otherwise than as I relate them, I should account it no small favor, if they would produce the originals, and should what I write not accord with them, I would acknowledge the justice of their censure, and study to amend my ways. But, until better evidence is forthcoming than their words, I shall adhere to my own opinion without seeking to deprive them of theirs, and give them tit for tat. And being minded that for this while this answer suffice, I say that with God and you, in whom I trust, most gentle ladies, to aid and protect me, and patience for my stay, I shall go forward with my work, turning my back on this tempest, however it may rage, for I see not that I can fare worse than the fine dust, which the blast of the whirlwind either leaves where it lies, or bears aloft, not seldom over the heads of men, over the crowns of kings, of emperors, and sometimes suffers to settle on the roofs of lofty palaces, and the summits of the tallest towers, whence if it fall, it cannot sink lower than the level from which it was raised. And if I ever devoted myself and all my powers to minister in any wise to your gratification, I am now minded more than ever so to do, because I know that there is naught that any can justly say in regard thereof, but that I, and others who love you, follow the promptings of nature, whose laws whoso would withstand, has need of powers preeminent, and, even so, will oft-times labor not merely in vain but to his own most grievous disadvantage. Such powers I own that I neither have, nor, to such end, desire to have, and had I them, I would rather leave them to another than use them myself. Wherefore let my detractors hold their peace, and if they cannot get heat, why, let them shiver their life away, and, while they remain addicted to their delights, or rather corrupt tastes, let them leave me to follow my own bent during the brief life that is accorded us. But this has been a long digression, fair ladies, and 'tis time to retrace our steps to the point where we deviated, and continue in the course on which we started. The sun had chased every star from the sky, and lifted the dank murk of night from the earth, when, Philostrato being risen, and having roused all his company, they hied them to the fair garden, and there fell to disporting themselves. The time for breakfast being come, they took it where they had supped on the preceding evening, and after they had slept they rose, when the sun was in his zenith, and seated themselves in their wonted manner by the beautiful fountain where Ficametta, being bidden by Philostrato to lead off the story-telling, awaited no second command, but debonairly thus began.